Two voices. I need to give you some context before I get into this, because without it, the story doesn't make sense. Or maybe it does, and I just need to believe it doesn't. My name is Sarah. This happened about 14 months ago, when I was 28 years old and living alone for the first time in my adult life. Not by choice, exactly. My boyfriend of 4 years, we'd been living together for 2 of those, ended things in February, and by March I was the sole occupant of a house that had always been meant for 2 people. 2 sets of furniture, 2 coffee mugs on the rack, 2 opinions on where the couch should go. He took a lot when he left. Not spitefully. We were civil about it, almost aggressively so, the way people are when they're more exhausted than angry. But the gaps he left behind were everywhere. The nail holes where his art used to hang. The second shelf in the bathroom cabinet, conspicuously empty. The right side of the bed, which I still didn't sleep on 8 months later. I worked from home, which sounds like a blessing until you're doing it alone in a house that echoes. My job was in content management for a small marketing firm. Screen-based, deadline-driven, the kind of work that's easy to hide inside for 12 hours at a stretch without realizing you haven't spoken to another human being all day. Some weeks, I didn't. Speak to anyone, I mean. Not out loud. That's when I got the Alexa. I know how that sounds. I'm aware. But I want to be honest about it because it matters to the story. I got it primarily for the company, not the utility. I didn't need a hands-free timer or help with my shopping list. I needed something that would answer me when I talked to it. Something that would fill the particular quality of silence that a house gets after 9 p.m. in October, when the neighborhood is gone quiet, and the only sound is the rain working its way down the gutters outside. I set it up on the bookshelf in the living room, angled toward the couch where I spent most of my evenings. Within a week, it had become part of the furniture, part of the atmosphere, really. I'd come downstairs in the morning, and its ring would be glowing that soft blue-white in the gray early light, and something about that would settle my chest in a way I couldn't fully articulate. It was just there, consistent, unchanged from when I'd left it the night before. Those autumn evenings had a specific texture I still remember clearly. The amber lamp in the corner, the wine glass sweating gently on the coffee table, whatever I was half watching on the television. The heat vent in the floor would cycle on with that familiar clank and hiss, an old house sound, something I'd startled at my first week there and stopped noticing by my third. Rain against the windows, steady and gray, the Alexa softly playing whatever I'd asked it for that night. True crime, usually, or one of those ambient playlists designed to make you feel like you're sitting inside a coffee shop somewhere you've never been. I fell asleep on that couch more nights than I made it to my actual bed. I'm not proud of it. It was just easier somehow. The TV, a low murmur, the rain outside, the lamp throwing its warm circle across the ceiling. The bed felt too deliberately empty. The couch felt like an accident, which was more bearable. By October, I'd settled into the kind of solitude that stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like routine. I wasn't happy exactly, but I was okay. I'd made peace with the quiet. I'd learned the sounds of the house, the vent, the pipes, the particular creak of the third stair, the way the back door settled in its frame when the temperature dropped. A house has its own language, and you learn it whether you want to or not. I thought I knew every word of it. On a Tuesday morning in the second week of October, I was standing in the kitchen waiting for my coffee to brew, scrolling through my phone the way you do when you're not really looking for anything. I had the Alexa app open. I'd been checking the shopping list feature I'd set up and never really used. The app has a section that logs voice recordings, short clips captured when the device detects its wake word or thinks it does. I scrolled through them out of idle curiosity more than anything else. Mostly they were nothing. Snippets of the TV, me asking about the weather. Then I saw one I didn't recognize. Time-stamped 2:14 a.m. from 3 nights prior. I didn't remember waking up that night. Didn't remember saying anything near the device. Didn't remember being in the living room at all. My thumb hovered over it for a moment, that small, specific hesitation before you do something you can't undo. Then I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. My own voice came through first, low and thick with sleep. 2 or 3 words I couldn't quite make out. Something like, "Not yet." Something like, "Stop." The kind of sounds a person makes when they're dreaming and the dream is pressing on them. And then, underneath it, behind it, there was something else. Another voice, male. Soft enough that I almost missed it beneath the familiar hiss of the heat vent, the low static of the recording. I couldn't make out what it said. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. I lived alone. I played it again, and again. Then 2 more times after that, each time pressing the phone a little harder against my ear, like pressure would somehow clarify what I was hearing. The clip was 11 seconds long. My voice at the front of it, shapeless, sleep-thick, barely human. And then that second sound, low and blurred, tucked underneath the ambient noise of the room like something trying not to be noticed. The most rational explanation was also the easiest one, so I went to it immediately and stayed there. Audio bleed. The device had picked up a neighbor's TV through the wall, or a passing car with its windows down, or some digital artifact of the recording process itself. 2 sounds stitched together by an algorithm that didn't know any better. These things happened. Devices weren't perfect. I wasn't perfect. I'd probably been talking in my sleep, and the Alexa had woken up thinking it heard its name, and the rest was just static I was turning into something because it was early and I hadn't had my coffee yet. I put my phone face down on the counter, poured my coffee, went upstairs and opened my laptop and started my workday. By noon, I'd told Mara about it over text, which tells you how seriously I was taking it. Mara was my closest friend. We'd known each other since college, the kind of friendship that survives distance and life changes, the particular strain of watching each other make poor romantic decisions for a decade. She responded immediately with a ghost emoji, then a string of question marks, then, "Okay, but that's deeply creepy." "It's probably nothing," I wrote back. "Probably," she agreed. Then, "Or you have a ghost boyfriend?" Upgrade from the last one, honestly. I sent her a laughing emoji. She sent one back. And just like that, it became a joke, which was exactly what I needed it to be. I filed it away somewhere small and went back to work. I didn't open the Alexa app again for 4 days. When I did, it wasn't because I was looking for anything. I was setting a timer for the pasta I had on the stove, and afterward my thumb drifted to the recordings section, the way your tongue goes to a sore tooth. Not intentionally, just drawn there. I told myself I was just checking, just curious, just making sure the Tuesday clip was still the only one. It wasn't. Scrolling back through the history, I found 2 more I hadn't noticed before. One from 3 weeks prior, one from 5 weeks before that. Both flagged between 1 and 3 in the morning. Both brief, 8 seconds, 14 seconds. I stood at my kitchen counter with the pasta boiling behind me and my whole body going very still. I pressed play on the older one first. The room sound hit me immediately. That specific combination of the heat vent's low hiss and the quality of silence that belongs to my living room and nowhere else. Not a TV bleed from next door, not an outdoor recording. The acoustics were unmistakably mine. And underneath them, again, the voice. Same register, same softness. Present enough to be real, obscured enough to be deniable. The pasta boiled over. I didn't move to turn it down. I stood there and played the second clip, and it was the same. 3 recordings across 5 weeks, all in the dead hours of the night, all captured in the precise sonic fingerprint of my living room. I turned the stove off. I sat down on the kitchen floor, which I'd never done before, and I thought very carefully about what these recordings were and what they weren't. I almost called Mara. Instead, I went through the house. Front door, locked, deadbolted, chain on. Back door, locked, handle checked twice. Windows on the ground floor, all 6 of them, latched. Nothing out of place, nothing missing, no sign of anything that shouldn't be there. By the time I'd finished the circuit, I'd talked myself most of the way back down, the way you do when the evidence refuses to cooperate with your fear. See, I told myself, nothing. You're doing that thing where you spiral. I was good at spiraling. Grief and isolation will do that to a person, and I'd had 8 months of practice, but I couldn't stop thinking about the blanket. It had been sitting at the end of the couch for weeks, just tossed there the way I always left it, one corner trailing toward the floor. I'd noticed maybe 10 days ago that it was folded, not neatly, not like I'd done it on purpose, but folded in that absent-minded way people do when they're sitting somewhere and their hands need something to do. I'd assumed I'd done it in my sleep or without thinking and moved on. And the back door 2 weeks before that, I remembered pulling it shut in the morning and finding it not quite latched, the latch sitting just proud of the strike plate, the door resting closed without actually catching. I'd assumed I'd been careless. And the drinking glass on the left side of the drying rack when I always put glasses on the right. Individually, each one was nothing. People misplace things. People forget. People fold blankets without remembering and leave doors not quite shut and put glasses on the wrong side of the rack. But I was staring at 3 recordings I hadn't made, from hours I'd been asleep, and the voice in all of them was not mine. That night I downloaded all 3 clips and uploaded them to a free audio editing tool I found after 20 minutes of searching. I don't know anything about sound engineering. I was just dragging sliders and hoping, reducing the background noise, isolating the frequency range of a human voice. The heat vent dropped away. The ambient hiss thinned out. The recording got cleaner. Not clean enough to make out words, but clean enough to be certain. It was a man's voice, low, unhurried, close enough to the device to register clearly. Someone standing in the middle of my living room. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the kitchen window. The house was completely quiet around me. I told myself I was spiraling. I didn't believe it anymore. I went back to the audio tool the next morning. I'd barely slept, spent most of the night on the couch, which I recognized even then as a strange choice, to return to the exact place where it had happened. But the bedroom felt worse somehow, more isolated. At least the living room had windows facing the street. At least there were passing headlights. At least there was the glow of the Alexa ring, which I'd stopped finding comforting and couldn't bring myself to unplug. I worked on the recordings for 2 hours. Slow, methodical, adjusting one setting at a time and playing it back, adjusting again. The free tool have limits. I wasn't working with professional software, wasn't someone who knew what they were doing. But I was patient in a way I hadn't been the night before, when my hands were shaking and I kept having to stop. That morning I was past the shaking. Something colder had settled in. The oldest recording came clearest. 5 weeks old, 14 seconds long. I stripped the background down to almost nothing. The heat vent gone, the ambient hiss reduced to a thin ribbon of white noise. What was left in the middle of it was a voice, unhurried, close to the device, which meant close to the bookshelf, which meant standing in the center of my living room, roughly 6 feet from where I slept on the couch. He said my name. Not loudly, not urgently. The way you'd say someone's name when you're standing near them and you want to see if they're really asleep. Sarah. Soft and even, almost gentle, the single word sitting in the cleaned-up silence of that recording, like something that had always been there, waiting for me to find it. I sat back from the laptop. My hands weren't shaking this time. My body had gone somewhere beyond shaking, into a stillness that didn't feel like calm. It felt like the moment before something falls. The moment you watch a glass tip off a counter and you already know you're not going to catch it. He knew my name. He had been in my living room at least 3 times in the past 5 weeks, and the recordings only stored 60 days of history. 60 days. I didn't know when it started. Couldn't now. Whatever was in those first 60 days was already gone, automatically deleted by an app that had no reason to hold on to it, and I had no way of knowing how far back this actually went. How many nights? How many times I'd been asleep on that couch while someone stood in the dark 6 feet away and said my name to see if I'd wake up. I called the non-emergency line at 9:43 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I stared at the clock on my laptop while it rang, needing something concrete to hold on to. The officer I spoke to was kind, patient. He listened without interrupting while I explained the recordings, the voice, the small wrongnesses, the blanket, the door, the glass. He asked me to describe the house, asked whether I'd noticed any signs of forced entry, asked if I'd had any conflicts with neighbors or former partners recently. "No signs of forced entry?" he said when I told him every lock had been intact every morning. "No, nothing broken, nothing damaged." A brief pause. "It's possible there's a technical explanation for the recordings. These devices can sometimes pick up." "He said my name," I said. I cleaned up the audio. "He said my name." Another pause, gentler this time. "He said he'd send someone out to do a walkthrough. He said it like he was doing me a favor, and I understood then that he had already filed me somewhere in his mind. The category of women who call about feelings and sounds and things that probably have simple explanations." I thanked him and hung up. The officer wasn't coming until that afternoon. I had hours to fill. I don't know what made me check the spare bedroom window. That room was empty, no furniture, boxes of things I hadn't unpacked stacked along one wall, a closet I hadn't opened since moving in. I used it for nothing, had no reason to go in there. But something pulled me down the hallway, some instinct I'd spent weeks talking myself out of listening to, and I pushed the door open and crossed to the window in the far wall. The latch was wrong. Not broken, not obviously tampered with, no scratches, no cracks in the frame, nothing that would have registered as damage in a casual glance. But the mechanism sat slightly proud of its housing, the way something does when it's been worked loose from repeated use. I reached out and pressed the latch with my thumb. It moved more freely than it should have, wobbled. I pushed the window from inside, and it held. Then I pressed at the top corner of the frame, applying slight outward pressure the way someone might from outside, fingers against the glass, finding the flex point. The latch turned. The window opened. The heat vent cycled on behind me, and I flinched so hard I took a step backward, crashing into one of the boxes stacked against the wall, my heart slamming into the top of my chest. Just the vent. The same sound I'd heard 1,000 times, the same clank and hiss that had been the background noise of my evenings for 8 months, as ordinary as breathing. My legs didn't feel right. I sat down on the nearest box and held my own hands together because I didn't know what else to do with them. He hadn't broken in. He'd found a window that opened if you knew how to push it, and he'd used it. And then he'd come into my living room and stood 6 feet from where I slept and said my name. And I had been here the whole time, coming home every day, making dinner, falling asleep on the couch, living in this house like it was mine, like I was alone in it. I called Mara before I did anything else. Not the police. I'd already done that. And the officer wasn't coming until the afternoon, and the afternoon felt a long way away. I called Mara because I needed to hear a voice I trusted, needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind, needed the specific steadiness that only comes from a person who has known you long enough to skip past the part where they question you. She answered on the second ring. I told her about the window. I told her about the audio, I told her the word he'd said. My name. Just my name. Soft and deliberate in the dark of my own living room. By the time I finished, I was sitting on the hallway floor outside the spare bedroom with my back against the wall because my legs still didn't feel trustworthy. "Pack a bag," Mara said. She didn't pause, didn't equivocate. "Right now, while we're on the phone, pack a bag and come here." It was the clearest instruction I'd been given in months. I stood up. I moved through the house quickly, methodically, the phone pressed between my ear and my shoulder while Mara talked. About nothing, mostly. The deliberate, mundane chatter of someone keeping another person tethered. I pulled a duffel bag from the bedroom closet. Clothes, toiletries, laptop, chargers. The kind of bag you pack when you don't know how long you'll be gone, but you're hoping it's not long. I kept my eyes moving. Every doorway, every corner. The bathroom as I passed it, dark inside. I reached in and hit the light without stepping in, just to see the empty room confirm itself. "Almost done," I told Mara. 2 minutes. "I'll stay on with you." I zipped the duffel, slung it over one shoulder, started down the stairs. The back door opened. Not loudly. Not a crash, not a forced entry. Just the quiet, settled sound of a door that knew how to open without making a fuss. The specific click of that latch releasing, the soft exhale of the seal breaking, the particular creak of that hinge I'd heard 100 times and never once feared until that exact moment. I stopped on the 4th stair. "Mara." My voice came out barely above a whisper. I couldn't make it louder. Someone just came in the back door. Silence on her end. Then, "Get to a room with a lock. Go. Now." I moved before she finished the sentence. Back up the stairs, down the hallway, into the bathroom, the only interior door in the house with a lock worth anything. I pulled it shut behind me, twisted the bolt, pressed my back against it. My heart was so loud I couldn't hear properly. My hands were shaking now, the cold steadiness of the last hour completely gone, adrenaline flooding in like a circuit that had finally blown. "I'm locked in the bathroom," I whispered. "Call 911, right now. Keep me on the other line if you can." I pulled the phone away, switched to speaker, set it on the edge of the sink, opened a second call. My fingers kept slipping on the screen. I misdialed once, caught it, redialed. The operator picked up and I whispered the address. Whispered, "There's someone in my house." Whispered, "Please hurry," in a voice so stripped down it didn't sound like mine. Then I waited. "Mara," a small tinny voice from the sink. I'm here. My back against the door, both hands pressed flat against the wood, like I could hold it shut through sheer intention. The footsteps started, unhurried. That's what I'll never get past, how unhurried they were. Moving through the kitchen, a brief pause, then into the living room. Not the steps of someone startled, not someone retreating. Someone walking through a familiar space, comfortable, oriented. A person who knew the layout of this house as well as I did. I didn't breathe. The 3rd stair creaked. That specific creak. The one I'd catalogued in my first week and forgotten completely. I heard myself make a sound into the back of my hand. A small, involuntary thing, pure animal fear pressed down to almost nothing. The footsteps stopped. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been 30 seconds. It felt like something you couldn't measure in ordinary time. Then, distantly, sirens. Still far off, but unmistakable, growing, the wail of them cutting through the walls and the rain outside. Movement. Quick now, the unhurried quality gone entirely. Footsteps down the stairs. Through the kitchen. The back door. That same soft click. Careful even in retreat. Then nothing. Just the rain and Mara's voice and the sirens pulling closer. The police cleared the house, room by room, while I stood in the hallway with my arms wrapped around myself, still in my coat, duffel bag at my feet. When the officer came back down, he was holding a small evidence bag. His expression was careful in a way that told me what was inside before he said anything. A coffee mug, white, generic, nothing I recognized, sitting on my kitchen counter. "Is yours?" he asked. "No," I said. The ceramic was slightly warm. He had been in my kitchen while I was upstairs packing, had stood at my counter and held that mug and listened to me moving around above him, drawers opening, the zip of the duffel, my footsteps crossing the bedroom floor, had waited, patient and unhurried, while I came down the stairs toward him. They pulled fingerprints from the spare bedroom window frame, a full, clean set. The officer who took my statement used words like person of interest and open investigation, and looked at me now with something different behind his eyes. No longer the careful gentleness reserved for women who called about feelings. Something more serious. Something that told me he understood, finally, and too late, that I had been right all along. I was out the door with my duffel before they finished the paperwork. Mara was already turning onto my street. I stayed with her for 6 weeks. I want to be honest about what those 6 weeks were actually like, because the story doesn't end when the police arrive and the sirens fade and your best friend's headlights pull up to the curb. That part, the part that comes after, doesn't get talked about enough. Everyone wants to know about the recordings, about the window, about the mug. Nobody asks what it's like to sleep in someone else's guest room and wake up at 2 a.m. with your heart already pounding, reaching for a phone to check an app that you've already deleted because you can't bear to look at it, but you also can't stop yourself from reaching. The first few nights at Mara's, I didn't sleep at all. Not really. I'd drift for an hour and snap back up, fully awake, listening to the sounds of an unfamiliar house and trying to sort them into safe and not safe. The pipes in our building ticked when the heat came on. A neighbor's dog barked sometimes around midnight. Normal sounds, harmless sounds. But my nervous system had stopped accepting that category, had decided after 8 months of being catastrophically wrong about what was normal, that it no longer trusted its own judgment about what was harmless. Mara never once made me feel like a burden. She left the hallway light on every night without being asked. She stopped playing music with rain sounds in it, just quietly changed the playlist one evening without mentioning why. And I loved her so much for that I couldn't speak for a moment. She made dinner and watched bad television with me and let me sit with the silence when I needed it, and talked when I didn't. And I think she understood that what I needed most was not to be fixed, but to be accompanied through something that couldn't be rushed. I went back to the house exactly once, with a friend's truck and a Saturday afternoon, and a very deliberate plan to take only what I genuinely needed. I'd expected it to be harder than it was. Instead, I felt almost nothing, a kind of flat, efficient numbness, room by room. The couch I left. Couldn't have explained why exactly, except that I knew I would never be able to sit on it again without knowing what had happened while I slept on it. How many nights, how many times he'd stood in that room and watched the rise and fall of my breathing in the dark. Some things become permanently altered by what happens near them. That couch was one of them. The Alexa I left too. Didn't even want to touch it. The officer who'd come back to follow up had mentioned that the recording history, properly extracted by their tech team, had yielded 2 additional clips beyond the 3 I'd found, both from the 60-day window I had access to, but buried in timestamps I hadn't scrolled far enough to reach. 5 recordings total, 5 nights that I knew about. I think about that ceiling a lot. 60 days and 5 recordings. Whatever was on the other side of that window, however far back it actually went, I'll never know. That's the part that stays with me more than anything else. Not what I found, but what was already gone before I ever thought to look. The investigation identified a person of interest within 2 weeks. A man in his late 40s who'd done odd jobs in the neighborhood. Lawn care, gutter cleaning, small repairs for several houses on the street. The kind of work that makes you a fixture, a known face, someone who belongs near a property in a way that draws no suspicion. Someone who would have had reason, at some point, to be at the house before I moved in. Who would have known its layout. Who would have found a window with a loose latch and noted it quietly and come back later. I was never told his name. I was told charges were being considered, which is the kind of language that means nothing and everything simultaneously. I check the county court records sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, searching for something that would tell me it was resolved, that there was a hearing, a charge, an outcome I could locate and hold on to. I haven't found one. I don't know if that means nothing happened, or if I'm simply not looking in the right place. And I've had to make a kind of uneasy peace with not knowing. I live in a different city now. Apartment this time, 3rd floor, a building with a doorman and a key fob entry, and neighbors close enough that I can hear their television through the wall, which I used to find annoying and now find deeply, genuinely comforting. I double-check my locks every night. I check them again before I sleep. I don't own any smart home devices, no voice assistants, no connected anything. I know intellectually that what happened wasn't the Alexa's fault, that it was the only reason I found out at all, that without those recordings I might never have looked for the window or understood what the folded blanket meant, or known any of it until it was too late to matter. I know that. It doesn't make a difference. I cannot have one in my home. And the rain sounds. The sleep playlists I used to love, the ambient recordings designed to make you feel held and warm and somewhere soft. I can't listen to them anymore. Something about the particular combination of that sound and darkness and the feeling of drifting towards sleep is enough to pull me back to that living room, that couch, the amber lamp and the blue-white pulse of the Alexa ring, and the quality of safety I felt there that was never, not once, actually real. I think about the recordings sometimes. That version of my own voice, low and sleep-thick, murmuring something I still can't fully make out. Not yet. Stop. My brain finding language for a threat my body had registered without waking me, the way a person turns away from a cold draft in their sleep, without ever becoming conscious of it. Some part of me knew. I think about how many times I came downstairs in the morning and saw the Alexa's ring glowing in the gray early light, and felt settled by it, felt accompanied, felt less alone. How I'd built an entire architecture of comfort around that object and the small routine of my evenings. The wine glass, the lamp, the familiar hiss of the heat vent, the sound of rain on the windows, all of it woven together into something that felt like safety because I needed it to. How he'd been inside all of it, moving through those evenings like a current running underneath, invisible, patient, already there. To this day, I don't fall asleep on couches. I don't leave interior doors open at night. I check the locks, and then I check them once more, and I lie in the dark and I listen to the sounds of my building the way I once learned the sounds of that house, sorting, cataloging, building a new map of what's normal. I trust it a little less than I used to. I think that's probably the right amount. I received a text from my own number that said, "I can see you." My phone was in my hand. The entire time, I want to start by saying that I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up in a house where the power went out constantly, where my older brothers thought jump scares were a personality trait, where my mom watched true crime documentaries the way other people watch cooking shows. Fear was kind of ambient background noise in my childhood. You got used to it. You learned to roll your eyes at the thing that goes bump in the night and go back to sleep. So when I tell you that this rattled me, that it still rattles me 2 years later, I need you to understand that's not nothing. My name is Jess. I was 24 when this happened. Living alone for the first time in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet building in a quiet part of town. The kind of neighborhood where dog walkers nod at each other and everyone recycles. Safe. Boring even. Exactly what I needed at the time. My ex, Daniel, had moved out about 2 months before all of this. Not a bad breakup. We'd just grown into different people, the way you sometimes do in your early 20s. He took the sectional and the good coffee maker. I kept the apartment, the plants, and a lot of very quiet evenings I was still learning how to fill. Working remotely didn't help with that. I did content editing for a small media company, all from my kitchen table. No office, no co-workers dropping by, no excuse to get dressed before noon if I didn't feel like it. Some days I loved it. Other days the apartment felt a little too sealed off from the world, like living inside a snow globe. That particular Tuesday, it was October, mid-month, the kind of fall that actually feels like fall. I'd had a good day, all things considered. Knocked out 2 articles before lunch, went for a walk around the neighborhood while the sky was still light, picked up Thai food on the way back. By 8 o'clock, I was on the couch with Pad CU and whatever season of a competition show I was working through, completely unbothered. The rain had started up around dinner time. A steady, soft kind of rain, the sort that makes the city sound far away. I remember I had the window cracked just slightly, enough to hear it hitting the awning below, that low rhythmic tapping. It made the apartment feel cozier somehow, like the world outside was doing its thing and I was safely separate from it. My phone was in my hand. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not on the counter, not charging on the nightstand, not buried in my bag. I was holding it, actively using it, scrolling through something forgettable, when the notification came in. A text. I felt the buzz against my palm. I looked down at the screen. The preview in the notification bar said one thing. 5 words. I can see you. That alone would have been unsettling from an unknown number, a wrong number, a weird bot, some middle-of-the-night spam. Creepy, sure, easy enough to brush off. But it wasn't from an unknown number. It was from mine. My own name at the top of the thread. My own contact photo, a picture I'd taken of myself at a friend's birthday 2 summers ago, laughing at something off camera, and underneath it, that message, time-stamped 8:14 p.m., I can see you. I sat there for a second, genuinely unsure if I was misreading it. Tilted the phone, like the angle was the problem. Looked at my contact info, looked back at the thread. Same number, 10 digits, mine. The rain kept tapping against the awning below. My first instinct, honestly, was embarrassment more than fear. That particular brand of anxiety that makes you feel stupid before anything else. Like I'd clearly done something dumb with my phone settings, or accidentally sent a message to myself through some app I didn't understand. I was 24, not ancient, but technology had a way of making me feel like I'd missed a memo. I Googled it. Sitting right there on the couch with my food going cold, I typed, "received text from my own number," and hit search. The results were immediate and, for a moment, reassuring. Spoofing. That was the word that kept coming up. Number spoofing, a technique where scammers or spam bots disguise their number to look like yours, figuring you're more likely to open a message that appears to come from yourself. It was a known thing. A documented, named, relatively common thing. There were Reddit threads about it. There were news articles. There was even a page on a consumer protection website explaining exactly what to do, which was essentially, don't engage, block if possible. It's annoying, but harmless. Harmless. I put my phone face down on the cushion beside me, picked up my food, and turned the volume back up on my show. I almost convinced myself that was the end of it. The rain outside had softened to something barely there, just a faint hiss against the glass now, steady and low. I remember noticing it in that moment, actually feeling my shoulders drop a little. It was fine. It was a spam bot. I'd had weirder things happen with my phone. I got through maybe 4 more minutes of the episode. Then the phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen without picking it up first, reading the preview from where it rested face up on the cushion. Same number, My number. You look cold. I was wearing a hoodie. I'd pulled it on maybe 20 minutes before the first text arrived. I picked up the phone. I read the message 4 times. 5. The words didn't change. You look cold. I was wearing a gray hoodie, an oversized one I'd stolen from Daniel before the breakup that I'd never given back. Pulled it on while I was waiting for the delivery driver to buzz up. Unremarkable. The kind of thing I wore 3 nights out of 7. I told myself it was a coincidence. I'm serious. I actually sat there and constructed a logical argument for why a spam bot sending a spoofed text to my own number had, by pure random chance, sent a message about being cold. On a cold night in October, when the majority of people sitting at home in October were probably also cold. It was a volume game, I reasoned. Send enough vague messages to enough people and eventually something lands. You look cold wasn't specific. It was just a phrase that happened to fit. I almost believed it. I was working so hard to believe it. I typed back, "Who is this anyway?" I knew the consumer protection article said not to engage, but I couldn't help it. I needed to see what happened. Either I'd get back some automated garbage that proved it was a bot, or I'd get nothing at all. Either way, I'd have my confirmation. Nothing came back. A minute passed, then 2. My show was still playing. I hadn't turned it off, just let it run in the background, laugh tracks filling the silence in a way that suddenly felt wrong. Too cheerful, too loud. I got up and checked the front door. It was locked. I'd locked it when I got home with the food, habit more than anything, the chain thrown too. I stood in the narrow entryway and looked at it for a moment, at the chain looped in its track, at the solid fact of the deadbolt. Then I felt stupid. Then I felt a little less stupid than I'd felt a moment before, which was worse somehow. I went back to the couch. I put half my attention on the show and half on my phone, waiting. 8:32 came and went. 8:45. By 9 o'clock I had genuinely, mostly settled down. I'd finished eating. The rain had picked back up. I could hear it properly again, drumming against the window, steady and indifferent. The normal sounds of a normal evening. I pulled my knees up to my chest and let the show wash over me and thought about nothing. That's when I called Maya. Not because I was scared, I told myself. Just because I hadn't talked to her in a few days, and it was a reasonable time to call, and I felt like hearing a familiar voice. That was all. I pulled up her contact and hit the green button, and she answered on the second ring, already laughing at something on her end. We talked for a while about nothing important. Her nightmare coworker, a dinner she'd had over the weekend. I told her about the texts, casually, framing it as a funny, weird thing that happened, the way you do when you want someone to confirm it's not a big deal. She didn't disappoint. "Oh, that's spoofing," she said immediately. "My cousin got that last month. They make it look like it's coming from your own number so you open it. It's just data harvesting, some overseas bot farm thing. Don't reply to it." I already replied. "Jess." She said my name like I'd admitted to something embarrassing. I know. I just wanted to see what would happen. Nothing good ever comes from I just wanted to see what would happen." She made me laugh. That was the thing about Maya. She had this way of deflating tension so completely that you forgot it was ever there. By the time we'd been on the phone 20 minutes, the texts felt distant and faintly ridiculous. A minor irritation, a weird Tuesday footnote. I was still smiling when my phone buzzed in my hand. Not a call notification, a text. Maya kept talking. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. My number, again. The message was 3 words. "Tell her hi." The smile left my face so fast it almost hurt. I hadn't said Maya's name out loud. I was almost certain of it. We'd gone straight into conversation. I'd never introduced her by name because why would I? She was just her, the person I was talking to. I stood up from the couch without deciding to, moved to the middle of the room. Had I said her name? I ran back through the conversation in my head. My nightmare coworker. A dinner. That's spoofing. My cousin got that. I'd said I and you and she and they. Had I said Maya? I genuinely couldn't remember. I talk without thinking. Always have. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd said it early on and forgotten. "Hey," I said into the phone. My voice came out strange, flat. "Did I say your name at any point in this conversation?" A pause. "What?" "My name. Did I say your name out loud at any point since we started talking?" Another pause, longer. "I don't think so." "Why?" I looked around the apartment, the lamp on the side table, the kitchen light I'd left on, the television still playing, the laugh track going off again like a punchline to a joke I hadn't heard. "I got another text," I said. "It says tell her hi." Maya went quiet on the other end. The rain hit the window in a sudden gust, harder than before, and I flinched at the sound. "Jess," Maya said slowly, "check your app permissions." I checked my app permissions. Maya stayed on the line while I navigated through my phone settings, microphone access, camera access, location. I went through every app I'd downloaded in the last 6 months, then the last year. Anything that had permissions it shouldn't. Anything that looked unfamiliar. There were a few things I flagged, turned off, deleted outright. A fitness app I'd used twice. A free VPN I'd downloaded when I was traveling and completely forgotten about. Maya narrated what to look for in the calm, efficient voice of someone who dealt with IT tickets at work and knew how this went. Nothing jumped out as obviously wrong. Nothing screamed, "This is it, this is the thing." "I think it might just be the spoofing thing after all," I said, after 10 minutes of this. "I don't see anything that could be listening." "Probably," Maya said. But she said it in the way people say probably when they mean maybe. We stayed on the phone a little longer, talked about nothing, let the conversation wind down naturally, the way it does when neither person wants to be the one to say goodbye first. When we finally hung up, it was 9:47. The apartment felt very quiet without her voice in it. I turned off the kitchen light and the lamp by the couch. Not because I was going to bed, I wasn't anywhere near tired, but because something had shifted in me without my full permission. Some animal part of my brain had made a decision while the rational part was still busy arguing. The dark would let me see out without being seen. That was the logic, if you could call it logic. I moved to the window. The rain was steady again, patient, the kind that had no intention of stopping. The street below was empty, wet pavement catching the orange of the streetlights, a parked car or two, nothing moving. I scanned left, then right, the building across the street, the small parking lot beside it, the narrow alley that ran between the laundromat and the old walk-up next door. That's when I saw it, a shape, in the alley. Just inside the reach of the streetlight, right at the edge where the orange glow gave up and the dark took over. Still, not moving at all, in the specific, deliberate way that things are still when they are choosing to be still. I told myself it was a trash can. I stared at it for a long time, long enough that my eyes started to blur and reshape everything. Could be anything. A dumpster, a recycling bin, a piece of furniture someone had left out. The alley was full of things. It was raining. Normal explanations existed, but trash cans don't have shoulders. My phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. "Why'd you turn the lights off?" The sound I made wasn't a scream. It was something smaller and worse than that. A sharp exhale, like the air had been pushed out of me. I stumbled back from the window. My heel caught the edge of the rug, and I went down hard on one knee, phone skidding out of my hand across the hardwood. I didn't move. Crouched there in the dark, on the floor, one knee on the rug and one hand flat on the cold wood, breathing in these short, useless bursts that weren't getting enough air in or out. The television was still on across the room, casting faint, shifting light across the ceiling. The rain hit the window steadily, indifferent. Whoever was sending these texts had just watched me turn the lights off, in real time. Not a scheduled message, not a bot running a script. They'd watched me cross the room, watched me kill the lights, and texted me about it within seconds. And they were standing in that alley right now, in the rain, looking up at my window. How long had they been there? That thought was the one that really broke something open, Not someone is watching me right now. As horrible as that was, it was immediate. It was present. It was a thing I could try to act on. It was the how long that unraveled me, because they knew I was cold before they made themselves known. They knew I was on the phone. They'd referenced Maya without a name, which meant they hadn't just arrived. They'd been there long enough to know my evening, long enough to learn my routine, long enough to feel comfortable, like they'd done this before. I grabbed my phone off the floor. My hands were shaking badly enough that I mistyped my passcode twice. Got it on the third try, pulled up the keypad, dialed 911 with my back flat against the base of the couch, as far from the windows as I could get without leaving the room. It rang once. 911, what's your emergency? I gave my address in a whisper, then caught myself and spoke up, hating how thin my voice sounded. I explained it as clearly as I could, the texts, the number, the figure in the alley. The dispatcher was calm and professional in the way that 911 dispatchers are trained to be calm, which sounds reassuring until you realize it means their voice doesn't change whether the situation is serious or not. I'm going to send a unit to do a drive-by and check the area, she said. Can you stay on the line? Yes, I said. Yes, absolutely. My phone buzzed against my palm. I pulled it away from my ear without meaning to, looked at the screen, one new message, my number. Hanging up now? I didn't hang up. I put the dispatcher back to my ear and told her what the text said. There was a brief pause on her end, the first crack in that professional calm, small enough that I might have imagined it. Stay on the line with me, she said. The unit is 4 minutes out. 4 minutes. I focused on that. 4 minutes was nothing. 4 minutes was the length of a song, the time it took to boil water, the gap between episodes when a streaming service asks if you're still watching. 4 minutes was survivable. I stayed on the floor, back against the couch, knees pulled up, phone pressed hard to my ear. I didn't look at the window. I made a decision not to look at the window, and I kept it, staring instead at the far wall, at a print I'd hung there when I first moved in. A botanical illustration of a fig tree, something I'd bought at a street market because it made the place feel like mine. I stared at it and breathed and listened to the faint static of the open line. The dispatcher asked me questions to keep me engaged. Was I alone? Yes. Were all entry points locked? I was pretty sure. Was I in a safe location within the apartment? I didn't know how to answer that. I said yes anyway. Then she said, "Unit is on your street." I exhaled so hard my vision blurred. I heard the patrol car before I saw it, that specific low rumble cutting through the rain. Couldn't help myself. I crawled to the window on my hands and knees and raised myself just enough to see over the sill. The cruiser moved slowly down the street, its spotlight sweeping in a wide arc across the storefronts and the parking lot and the alley between the laundromat and the walk-up. The alley was empty. Nothing there, no figure, no shape, no shoulders at the edge of the dark. Just wet concrete and a dumpster shoved against the far wall and a tangle of old bikes someone had chained to a drain pipe. The spotlight lingered, swept back, moved on. Part of me felt relief. The other part felt something colder and harder to name. The officer on patrol called my number a minute later. Middle-aged voice, not unkind. He'd checked the alley, checked the perimeter of the building, nothing visible. The texts, he said gently, were almost certainly a spoofing scam. He'd seen a few reports lately, same type of thing, very unsettling, but generally not tied to any physical threat. He suggested I contact my carrier in the morning and maybe update my phone's software. "Do you feel safe enough to stay in the residence tonight?" he asked. I said yes. I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe, or the particular exhaustion that sets in after a long spike of adrenaline, when your body wants to be done with the whole thing and your brain starts looking for any exit that lets you call it over. We hung up. I sat in the quiet apartment and listened to the rain and tried to feel reassured. I lasted about 6 minutes. Then I did what I should have done the moment that second text arrived. I moved through every room, methodically, lights on, door to door. Bathroom first, shower curtain pulled back. Nothing. Kitchen, pantry door opened wide. Nothing. Bedroom, closet pushed open with my back against the wall like I'd seen in 100 movies. Hangers and jackets and one box of Daniel's mail I'd never forwarded. Nothing. Under the bed, I got down on my stomach and looked, heart slamming. Nothing but dust and a missing sock. I straightened up and stood in the center of my bedroom and breathed. Nothing. Empty apartment. Locked doors. Police had checked outside. It was a scam, a horrible, invasive scam run by someone somewhere who would never know my name. I almost had myself. I walked back to the hallway, that narrow stretch between the bedroom and the living room, all the doors visible from one spot, every exit in my sightline at once. Something about it felt right, safer than any individual room. I leaned against the wall and let myself slide down it until I was sitting on the floor again, legs stretched out, the whole apartment quiet around me. My phone buzzed. One final time. I looked at the screen for a long moment before I let myself read it. My number. Of course. Always my number. Smart girl. Hallway was always the safest spot. The floor seemed to tilt. They had watched me check every room. Through what? A window? A compromised camera? Something else entirely that I still don't understand and maybe never will? They had watched me make my methodical loop through my own home, trying to feel safe. And they had watched me choose the hallway, and they had decided that was the moment to let me know. Not when I was on with the police, not when I was at the window. Now, when I thought it was over. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door, didn't get a jacket, didn't get my laptop or my charger or the overnight bag I kept on the top shelf of the closet, just my keys and my phone and the hoodie I was already wearing. I undid the chain, turned the deadbolt, opened the door, and I walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the rain without looking back once. I drove to Maya's with every light I passed, running amber. She opened the door before I even knocked. I must have texted her from the car, though I don't fully remember doing it. She took one look at my face and stepped aside and didn't ask me anything until I was sitting at her kitchen table with both hands around a mug of something hot. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. The police took a full report the next morning. A different officer this time, younger, thorough, the kind who actually wrote things down. I sat across from him at the precinct with Maya beside me and walked through everything in order. The texts, the timestamps, the specific wording, the figure in the alley, the final message about the hallway. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated, and when I was done, he was quiet for a moment in a way that felt like he was choosing his words carefully. The texts, he explained, had been sent using a spoofing service. The kind you could access online, some of them barely even illegal depending on jurisdiction. Most of them routed through servers overseas in ways that made tracing the origin genuinely difficult. Not impossible, he said, but difficult. They'd look into it. He'd file the report, flag it, pass it to someone who handled this type of thing. I asked him directly, was there someone outside my building that night, or wasn't there? He said he couldn't confirm that. The drive-by had found nothing. But absence of evidence, he said carefully, was not the same as evidence of absence. I've thought about that sentence a lot since then. The Carrier investigation went nowhere. They confirmed the spoofing, confirmed the texts had not originated from my device, confirmed that the technical sophistication involved was, and I remember the exact word the representative used, notable, not the work of a basic automated script. Something more deliberate, more targeted. They couldn't tell me more than that, and after 2 follow-up calls that went unreturned, I stopped asking. I went back to the apartment once, during the day, with Maya waiting downstairs in her car with the engine running. Packed 2 bags, grabbed my laptop, took the plant I liked best. Broke the lease the following week. The landlord was irritated. I paid the penalty without arguing and didn't explain why, because I didn't have the energy to watch someone try to talk me out of it. The thing people don't tell you about an experience like this is how it rewires the ordinary. For months afterward, my phone buzzing felt like a small electric shock. That half second of pure animal fear before I registered it was just a notification, just a friend, just an email. I kept my blinds completely closed for the first time in my life. Not mostly closed, not almost closed. Flat against the glass, every room, every window, every night without exception. I still do that. 2 years later. It's just habit now, or that's what I tell myself. The question I couldn't let go of, the one that followed me from that apartment and into every place I've lived since, wasn't who it was. It wasn't even how they got my number or how they did what they did, technically. It was the timeline. It was the hoodie. They knew I was cold before they said a word, which means they were watching before 8:14 p.m., before that first text, before I had any reason to think about the window or what might be visible through it. They had been standing in that alley, or somewhere nearby, long enough to observe me, long enough to feel settled, long enough to decide tonight was the night to make contact. Contact. That's the word that gets me, because that's what it was, not a random scam, not automated harassment. Someone had chosen to reach out, to let me know they were there. And the only reason you do that, the only reason you stand in the rain for hours watching a woman alone in her apartment and then send her a message telling her you can see her, is because you want her to know. Because the knowing is the point. Because fear, delivered precisely, is its own kind of power. I don't know who it was. I have a short list in my head that I've never said out loud to anyone, not even Maya, because naming it feels like it gives it more shape than I can handle. I don't know if they've done this to someone else since. I don't know if that person was as lucky as I was. If lucky is even the right word for what I was, given that I never actually confirmed anything happened at all. What I know is this: I left. I trusted the part of me that had already made the decision before my brain caught up. I grabbed my keys and I walked out, and I drove through the rain to someone who left the light on for me, and I was safe. I know that for every logical explanation that existed that night, spoofing bots, coincidental messages, shadows in alleys that turned out to be nothing, there was a version of me who accepted all of them, who talked herself back to the couch each time, who stayed. I'm grateful I wasn't that version. The blinds are closed right now as I'm writing this. It's raining outside, that same soft, patient kind of rain, the sort that makes the world sound far away. The apartment I'm in now is different, better locks, higher floor, no alley across the street. But I still sit with my back to the wall, and I still keep the light on in the hallway. My GPS history showed I was at an address I've never been to, every night for 2 weeks straight. I moved to the city 9 months ago for a job I was terrified to take. 31 floors up in a glass building downtown, a title on my email signature I hadn't earned yet, and an apartment I could barely afford in a neighborhood where I didn't know a single person. 24 years old and doing everything right, supposedly. It just didn't feel that way at 2 in the morning when the walls were too close and the street noise below was the only proof I wasn't completely alone. The apartment was fine. Small, but fine. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a bathroom where the radiator knocked every night around 11, like it had somewhere to be. I'd painted 1 wall a dusty terracotta because some article told me that made a space feel intentional. It helped a little. Some evenings, with the rain coming down against the window and the kettle going and whatever show I'd put on for background noise, it almost felt like home. Almost. I didn't have many people here yet. My coworkers were friendly in the way people are when they've already sorted their lives into neat compartments, and yours doesn't fit neatly into any of them. I had Danny, 1 friend, a good one, who lived 40 minutes across town and worked nights 3 days a week. We texted more than we saw each other. I called my mom on Sundays. Outside of that, my social life was mostly me and Google Maps. That sounds sadder than I mean it. What I mean is, I was new here, and I relied on that app the way you rely on a good sense of direction when you don't have one. Every coffee shop I stumbled into, every side street that turned out to be a shortcut, every farmer's market I found by accident, I let Google Maps log it. I liked being able to scroll back through my week and see where I'd been. It made the city feel smaller, more familiar, more mine. My routine was predictable enough that the map barely changed week to week. Office by 8:30, gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the one 6 blocks south with the broken air conditioning I kept meaning to complain about. Grocery run on Saturdays, home by 7 most nights, sometimes earlier. The kind of life that looks boring from the outside and feels, when you're living it, like something quietly manageable, something you can hold. I'd been in that rhythm for about 7 months when things started to feel off. Nothing dramatic, just small things I couldn't quite explain. The toiletries on my bathroom shelf had been rearranged. My moisturizer on the left usually, and now it was on the right next to my toner. My window in the bedroom, which I always latched before leaving in the morning, was unlatched twice in 1 week. I thought I'd imagined it the first time. The second time, I stood in my doorway for a long moment, just looking at it. Then I closed it, latched it, and went to make dinner. I told myself I was tired. New city anxiety, the kind of hypervigilance that comes from living alone for the first time and hearing every creak in the building as a potential threat. I'd read that somewhere. I believed it mostly. It was a Thursday night in late October when I found it. The rain had come in hard around 6, the kind that sounds like television static against the glass, and I'd been on the couch for 2 hours, radiator clicking behind me, a candle I kept forgetting to blow out guttering on the shelf. I was half watching something and half scrolling through my phone when I decided to look up a coffee place I'd tried earlier that week. A little spot near the river, good latte. I couldn't remember the name. I opened Google Maps and pulled up my timeline. I found the coffee shop. And then I kept scrolling. There was an address I didn't recognize, flagged on the map with that familiar red pin, the kind that means you stopped there, you were there, your body was in that location. I stared at it. A street name I knew. I'd driven down it twice, maybe, getting turned around in those first disorienting weeks. But the specific address, the number, the little dot sitting 4 blocks from my apartment. Nothing. No memory. No reason. I tapped on it. 17 visits. 17 separate nights. Always arriving sometime between 11 p.m. and 2 in the morning. Always for 30 to 90 minutes. Always departing back in the direction of my apartment. The earliest entry was 14 days ago. The most recent was 2 nights before. I sat up slowly. The show I'd been half watching said something I didn't hear. Outside, the rain came down harder against the glass, and the candle flame shuddered in the draft from under the door. I went back to the map and zoomed in on the address until I could see the street view. A house. Ordinary, residential, dark in the photo. The kind of house you drive past 100 times without looking at it. I had never been there. I was sure of this, the way you're sure of the things that make up your daily life. I had been home those nights. I had been asleep. I knew my own routine the way I knew the knock of the radiator, or the particular way my keys sounded dropping onto the counter. There was no version of the past 2 weeks in which I had gotten into my car 14 times after midnight and driven 4 blocks to a stranger's house. And yet, I put the phone face down on the couch cushion, picked it back up, looked at it again. 17 visits. My name, my account, my location history. I told myself it was a glitch. The next morning, I did what any reasonable person does when their phone shows them something that can't be right. I started looking for the explanation. I went through my location permissions first. Every app, every setting, every toggle I'd never paid attention to during setup. 14 apps had access to my location at all times. 14. I hadn't realized. I turned off the ones I didn't recognize and told myself that was probably it. Some rogue app pinging the wrong coordinates, logging phantom movements the way old phones used to ghost dial numbers from your pocket. It was a clean, satisfying theory. I held on to it through my morning coffee and most of my commute. By lunch, I wasn't holding on to it anymore. I Googled the address on my break, sitting in the little glass-walled room we were supposed to use for calls. Residential, no business attached, no Yelp page, no news mentions, nothing that explained why any app would use it as a default coordinate. Just a house, just a number on a street 4 blocks from where I slept every night. I stared at the street view image for longer than I should have. The narrow driveway, the curtains in the front window, the porch light that was probably on a timer. I kept waiting for something to click. Nothing did. That evening I went deeper into my phone. Battery usage logs, background activity, every permission screen I could find. And that's when I saw it. In my Google account settings, tucked under a tab I'd never opened. A second account, signed in alongside mine. An email address I didn't recognize. A long string of letters and numbers. The kind that gets auto-generated. The kind that looks like it was never meant to be read by a person. I stared at it for a while. Then I told myself it was probably a leftover from when the phone was set up. I'd bought it refurbished. Maybe the previous owner's account had never been properly wiped. Maybe it was some kind of Google backup account generated automatically during migration. I didn't know enough about how any of it worked to rule that out. So I didn't. I closed the tab and made dinner and put the TV on loud. But I started keeping track of my nights. Not obsessively. Or at least I told myself it wasn't obsessive. Just a note in my phone before bed. Home. Asleep by 11. And in the morning I'd check the timeline. Every night that week, the address appeared. Every single night. And every morning, my note said the same thing. I had not left. I was certain of it. By Saturday, I needed to see the house. I drove past it in the early afternoon, slow enough to look, but not so slow it would seem strange to anyone watching. It was exactly what the street view had shown me. Unremarkable, slightly overgrown at the edges, the kind of house that exists in every neighborhood without anyone being able to describe it afterward. An older model sedan sat in the driveway, dark blue or maybe black, hard to tell in the flat gray light. The curtains in the front window were drawn. I was almost past it when the curtain moved. Not a lot. Just a shift, a slight gathering at the edge like someone had stepped back from the glass. I pressed the accelerator and didn't look in my rearview mirror until I'd turned the corner. My hands were steadier than I expected. The rest of me was not. I'd been tracking my mileage since July. Loose habit. Started when I was trying to figure out my gas budget. I checked the numbers that night against my logs. The discrepancy was small. 43 miles over 3 weeks that I couldn't account for. Enough to drive to that address and back every night for 2 weeks, I calculated, before I made myself stop calculating. There was still an explanation. There was still a rational version of this. The mileage could be anything. A miscalculation on my part, a long route I'd taken without noting it. The account could be a glitch. The curtain could have been the wind through a cracked window. I was new here. I was tired. I was alone too much and therefore thinking too much. I'd been anxious since I moved. My doctor had adjusted my medication twice in the past 6 months. What if the medication was doing something? What if I was doing something at night and not remembering it? What if the GPS was right? I booked a doctor's appointment that night. First available, 2 weeks out. I nearly didn't look at my camera roll. I'd been through my phone so many times by then that opening it felt like picking at something that had barely started to heal. But I was already there, already in the apps, already doing what I'd been doing for a week. And so I scrolled back through my photos to the beginning of October. The picture was near the bottom, time-stamped 12:31 a.m. on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks ago. I had been asleep at 12:31 a.m. on a Tuesday night. I was certain of this. It was a photo of my building, shot from the sidewalk outside, at street level, angled slightly upward. The 4th floor lit yellow through the curtains. My floor, my window, my lamp that I always left on because the apartment felt too dark without it. The photo was clear, recently taken, not blurred by motion. I was in my bed when that photo was taken. Someone was standing outside looking up at me. The rain against the window that night sounded different than it usually did, less like white noise, more like something trying to get in. I sat on the floor of my living room with my back against the couch and my phone in both hands, and for the first time since I'd found the address, I let myself think the thing I'd been refusing to think. This wasn't a glitch. I didn't sleep much that night. Lay in bed with the lamp on and my phone face up on the pillow beside me, checking it every 20 minutes the way you check a door you're not sure you locked. By 3 in the morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to keep auditing the past. I was going to document the present. I downloaded a free recording app, the kind people use to catch snoring, and set my phone propped against the spine of a book on my nightstand, angled toward the bed. Wide enough frame to catch the whole room, both doors visible in the background. If I left that night, I'd see it. If something else happened, I'd see that too. I told myself it was just to rule things out, to give myself the clean answer I needed to move forward. I turned the lamp off, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling until somewhere around 4, when I finally went under. In the morning, I watched 40 minutes of footage and fast forward with my coffee going cold on the counter. I never left. The footage was unbroken, me asleep, the room dark and still, the curtains doing nothing, the doors not moving. 8 hours of absolute quiet except for the rain picking up around 2 and the radiator starting its knocking at 11:15, right on schedule. I was there the whole night. I had not moved. I opened Google Maps. The address was logged at 12:47 a.m. I put my coffee down very carefully. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water over my wrists the way my mother used to tell me to do when I was overwhelmed, and I stood there for a while looking at myself in the mirror. Then I went back to my phone and I opened the Google account settings and I looked at that second account again, the one I'd dismissed a week ago as a leftover, a glitch, a nothing. I tried to log into it this time. It accepted my password on the second attempt. Not a complex one, just the standard default I used to use before I got better about that kind of thing. And when it opened, I stood in my kitchen and felt the floor go soft beneath me. The account had my name, my full name, first and last, exactly as it appears on my LinkedIn profile. The profile photo was mine too, the one I use professionally, the one from the headshot I'd had done when I started the new job, slightly cropped differently than my version of it. The account details listed a phone number I didn't recognize, and under location, saved as the primary address, my apartment, my building, my floor, my unit number. Someone had built a copy of me. A parallel account, dressed in my details, and they had been logging their movements, their nightly trips to that house 4 blocks away, under my name, for 2 weeks, possibly longer, and I'd just only started looking. My hands were shaking by the time I called my carrier. I told the representative everything, or tried to. It came out in the wrong order, and I had to stop twice and start again. She was patient. She checked my account thoroughly. No secondary authorized device, no cloned SIM, no forwarding, no anomalies on their end that she could identify. She suggested I contact Google directly. She gave me a reference number that I wrote down and never used because there is no phone number for Google. There is no human at Google. There is a help forum full of unanswered posts from people who have lost access to their accounts and a chatbot that does not understand what I was trying to tell it. I called the non-emergency police line at 11 in the morning. The officer who answered was professional and kind in the way that people are when they've already categorized your call before you've finished explaining it. I told him about the GPS history. I told him about the account, the photo, the mileage discrepancy. He listened without interrupting. "That does sound frustrating," he said. "Have you tried contacting Google support?" I told him I had. I told him there wasn't really a support line, not for this. "It sounds like primarily an account issue," he said. "There's not a lot we can do without evidence of a direct threat. If you receive any communication from someone, or if you feel you're being followed, please call back and we can send someone." I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him. I sat down on the bathroom floor after I hung up. The one room in my apartment without a window, without a view of the street, without any way for anyone outside to look in. The tiles were cold through my jeans. The building was quiet around me. Somewhere a few floors up a door closed, and I flinched at the sound of it, which told me something about where I was by then. I was trying to figure out my next move when my phone buzzed on the floor beside me. Unknown number. One message. You really should stop driving past my house. I read it 4 times. I know I read it 4 times because I counted, which is the kind of thing your brain does when it is trying to stay functional and running out of ways to manage. Outside, the rain had started again, steady, indifferent, drumming against the bathroom's small frosted window like it had no idea what was happening on the other side of the glass. I didn't move for a long time. He knew my number. He knew I had driven past. He had been watching closely enough to see me slow down from behind a curtain on a gray Saturday afternoon, closely enough to find my number and type those 9 words and press send and wait. He was waiting for me to read it. I was certain of that, too. I called Danny from the bathroom floor. Didn't explain it well on the phone, just told her I needed her to come, that something was wrong, that I'd tell her everything when she got there. She didn't ask me to clarify. That's the thing about a good friend. She just said 20 minutes and hung up. She made it in 17. I heard her knock and still flinched at it. I'd printed everything by the time she arrived, or tried to. My printer ran out of ink on the 3rd page, so I'd switched to screenshots, 31 of them, organized in my camera roll in chronological order, the way you do things when your brain needs the illusion of control. I laid my phone on the kitchen table and walked her through it while she stood with her coat still on, not saying anything, scrolling with one finger. I watched her face change as she went. "Okay," she said finally, in a voice that was very quiet and very steady. "Okay, let's figure out who this is." She was better at this than me, calmer, more methodical, less likely to get stuck staring at the same detail for 10 minutes without moving forward. While I made tea I didn't drink, she pulled up the county assessor's website and searched the address. The house belonged to a man. She read the name aloud. I didn't recognize it, not even a flicker, not the faint familiarity of someone you've met briefly and half forgotten. Nothing. He was 53 years old according to the public record. The house had been in his name for 11 years. Danny searched his name on Facebook. The profile wasn't private, which told its own small story about the kind of person he was, or the kind of person he wanted to appear to be. Sparse, but present. Local neighborhood groups, a few shares of community board announcements, the occasional photo. She scrolled slowly. I stood behind her and watched over her shoulder. Most of the photos were unremarkable. A backyard in summer, a plate of food, a blurry shot at what looked like a town fair. And then, near the bottom of the scroll, 9 months old, posted 3 weeks after I'd moved to the city. A grocery store interior, taken from the checkout line. Someone's cart loaded with weekend shopping. The caption something about meal prepping. The kind of content that exists only to prove a person is normal and busy and fine. Danny stopped scrolling. In the background of the photo, soft-focused, half-turned, reading the label on something she was about to put back on the shelf, was me. I hadn't known he was there. I'd had no reason to look up. I was in my 3rd week in a new city, alone and still learning which grocery store had the better produce, and somewhere behind me, a man had taken a photo that I was standing in without either of us being aware of the other. Except he had been aware. At some point after that shutter clicked, he had looked at the photo and seen me, and he had done something with that. My tea had gone cold. The rain outside had softened to a low, steady murmur. I stood in my kitchen and looked at myself in the background of a stranger's photo and tried to understand the distance between that moment, ordinary, unremarkable, me reaching for something on a shelf, and the text on my phone that still sat face up on the bathroom floor. You really should stop driving past my house. We need to go to the station, Danny said. Not the phone line, in person, with all of this printed out. I nodded. I wasn't going to argue. We left within the hour. I grabbed my laptop, my charger, the folder of screenshots I'd paper-clipped together. My cat, Marin, was asleep on the bed, and I picked her up and put her in her carrier without really thinking about it. I wasn't planning to come back that night. Some part of me had already decided that before Danny arrived. I didn't look up at my window as we walked to her car. The officer at the station was different from the voice on the phone that morning. Younger, a woman, who leaned forward when I started talking instead of settling back. She looked at the screenshots in the order I handed them to her, and she didn't tell me it sounded like an account issue. She asked clarifying questions, specific ones, the kind that meant she was already thinking about what came next, rather than looking for the fastest way to close the report. When I got to the text message, she wrote something down without me prompting her. 2 days later, she called me. They had brought him in for questioning. He'd been cooperative, she said, which somehow made it worse. The image of him sitting across a table from someone, calm, cooperative, a man who'd built a copy of my identity and spent 2 weeks logging his nightly trips to my apartment building under my name and was now being cooperative about it. No charges yet. The threshold for a direct threat hadn't been met, but a formal warning had been issued and documented, and they would be monitoring the address. "Is there somewhere you can stay for a while?" she asked. I was already at Danny's. I told her that. "Good," she said. There was a pause. "You did the right thing coming in." I thanked her and stayed on the call a few seconds longer than I needed to, not quite ready to hang up and sit with the quiet. I stayed at Danny's for 11 days, slept on her pull-out couch with Marin wedged against the back of my knees, listening to a neighborhood that sounded different than mine, different traffic patterns, different pipes, a dog somewhere down the block that barked at exactly 6:15 every morning like it had a calendar. I didn't mind the dog. I minded the silence more than I minded the dog. I went back to my apartment twice during those 11 days, both times with Danny waiting in the car outside. First to get clothes, second to get the rest of Marin's food, and the small framed photo of my mother I'd left on the windowsill. I moved quickly both times, didn't linger in doorways or stand at the window looking out the way I used to on quiet evenings. The apartment felt different now. The same galley kitchen, the same terracotta wall, the same radiator that knocked at 11. But something about knowing it had been watched from the outside made the inside feel permeable in a way I couldn't explain and couldn't shake. I gave notice 6 weeks later, moved to a building on the opposite side of the city, higher floor, a doorman who I was probably too grateful to see every morning. I deleted every app that had ever had access to my location. I changed my passwords across everything, not just the obvious accounts, but the small forgotten ones, the ones from college, the ones attached to email addresses I barely used. I spent an entire Sunday removing myself from every People Finder site I could locate, which is a longer afternoon than you'd think because there are more of those sites than any reasonable person should be comfortable with. I still find new ones sometimes. I still submit removal requests. I turned my LinkedIn profile private. I took down the professional headshot, the one he'd used, the one I'd been proud of when I first posted it, the one that made me look like a person who had arrived somewhere. Looking at it felt different after. I put up a different photo, one where my face was smaller and less clear, and I was aware of the calculation in that and didn't know how to feel about it. The officer called once more, about a month after the warning was issued. No new activity, no contact from him, nothing to report. She said it the way people say things they hope will be reassuring. I appreciated the call. I wasn't reassured exactly, but I appreciated the call. He never contacted me again. Not that I'm aware of. That qualifier sits in me differently on different days. Most days it's just the honest truth. I can't know what I can't see, and what I can't see no longer logs itself helpfully under my name on a map. Some days the qualifier feels like a window left unlatched, a small gap between what I know and what might be true that I can't fully close. No matter how many permissions I revoke or accounts I delete or floors higher, I move. The thing that stays with me, the thing that's harder to explain than the fear, which at least had a logic to it, is what those 2 weeks did to my sense of my own life. The GPS history didn't just tell me someone was watching me. It told me my own data had been turned against me, made to describe a version of me I didn't recognize. A me who drove to a stranger's house 14 times in the dark, while the real me slept 2 blocks away with no idea. There is something particular about that kind of violation. It's not a broken lock or a note under a door. It's your own name doing something you didn't consent to. Your own face in someone else's account. Your own routine, the gym on Tuesdays, the grocery run on Saturdays, the lamp you leave on because the apartment feels too dark without it, turned into a map someone else could read. I think about the girl in the background of that grocery store photo more than I'd like to admit. She's reaching for something on a shelf, about to put it back, completely inside her own ordinary moment. She doesn't know she's being seen. She doesn't know that somewhere behind her a shutter is clicking, and she is being folded into someone else's story without her knowledge or permission. She looks, in the soft, unfocused background of that photo, like a person who feels safe. I remember what that felt like. I'm working my way back to it. I trust my instincts differently now, not more exactly. I'm not sure I had instincts that were failing me so much as a reasonable human tendency to prefer the comfortable explanation, the glitch theory, the leftover account, the mileage rounding error. I wanted there to be a clean answer because clean answers meant I could stop looking, stop auditing, stop sitting on bathroom floors with my back against the tub at 11 in the morning. There wasn't a clean answer. There rarely is, I think. The unsettling thing about this kind of danger is how long it can dress itself in the ordinary before you see it clearly. I'm careful now, more than I'd choose to be in a perfect world, less than I probably should have been before. I check my connected accounts the first Sunday of every month, the way some people check their smoke detectors. I keep location services off unless I'm actively using navigation, and I close maps the moment I'm done. Small adjustments, the kind that become invisible after a while, folded into the routine, indistinguishable from any other habit. I don't know what he was counting down to. I don't know what those nights meant to him, what he was documenting, what the end point looked like in whatever version of events was running in his head. I've made a kind of uneasy peace with not knowing, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life trying to think like someone whose mind works that way, and I'm not willing to do that. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'd like to stay that way. I set up a camera because I kept waking up exhausted. Someone had been opening my bedroom door at the same time every night. The doctor told me I was in perfect health. That was, without question, the most frightening thing anyone said to me that entire year. This was October, maybe 5 months after I'd moved into the apartment on Greer Street. I'd gone in because I couldn't explain the tiredness anymore. Not regular tiredness, not the kind you accumulate from a bad week or too much screen time or not drinking enough water. This was something else entirely. A heaviness that was there before I opened my eyes every morning, waiting for me. Like sleep itself had stopped working. Like my body was going through the motions of rest without actually getting any. I'd wake up after 8 hours feeling like I'd been dragged through something. My doctor ran the full panel: thyroid, iron, cortisol, vitamin D, sleep apnea screening, the complete checklist of things that explain fatigue in otherwise healthy men in their early 30s. Everything came back clean. She said I looked good, said my blood work was, and I remember this word specifically, unremarkable. She suggested I try cutting caffeine after noon and going to bed at a consistent time, and gave me a pamphlet about sleep hygiene that I folded in half and left in the car. I want to be clear about something. I was already doing all of it. Had been for months. Consistent bedtime, dark room, phone on the other side of the apartment, no alcohol, no caffeine past noon. I was so consistent about it that my neighbor Owen, we'd gotten friendly over the mailboxes in the way you do when you're new somewhere and slightly lonely, had started calling me the monk because I turned my lights off at 10 every night like clockwork. I was doing everything right, and every single morning I woke up exhausted. I'm 32. I work in permit review for the city planning department. Not a physically demanding job, not an emotionally volatile one, not the kind of work you take home with you at night. My life at the time was genuinely calm. I'd moved to the Greer Street apartment in the spring after my lease elsewhere ran out, and a colleague mentioned the vacancy. Ground floor unit in a converted Victorian, high ceilings, big windows. The kind of place that photographs better than it insulates. I liked it immediately. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older residents and young families. The kind of block where people still set their trash out the night before and retrieve it the same evening. I tell you all of this because I need you to understand that there was nothing obviously wrong. No stress I wasn't managing. No bad habits I was hiding. No obvious source for what my body was doing. The exhaustion just arrived one morning and never left. And for months, I treated it as a personal failing. Something I could fix if I was disciplined enough. If I optimized the right variables. If I simply tried harder at sleeping. I should have been asking different questions. The camera was Owen's idea, actually. We were talking about it one evening in the parking lot. Me describing the latest doctor visit, the clean blood work, the pamphlet, and he half joked that maybe I had a carbon monoxide leak and should sue the landlord. Then, more seriously, he said, "Did you ever think about setting up a camera, just to see what's actually happening while you sleep?" I had not. It seemed like a strange thing to do in your own bedroom, private somehow, in a way that felt slightly embarrassing. But I'd run out of other ideas weeks ago, and I was tired enough, genuinely, deeply tired enough, that embarrassment had started to seem like a luxury I couldn't afford. I ordered one that night, a small indoor camera, the kind marketed for watching pets, with night vision and motion detection, and a companion app that stored clips to the cloud. It arrived 2 days later. I set it up on the bookshelf across from the bed, angled to capture the room, and went to sleep, feeling vaguely ridiculous. The next morning, I opened the app while my coffee brewed. The motion detection had logged 2 clips from the night before. The first was me rolling over around 1 a.m., which explained itself. I tapped the second one with my thumb, expecting more of the same. A blanket shift, a restless moment, whatever. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. In the clip, I was still, deeply asleep from the look of it, not moving at all. The room was exactly as I'd left it, the outlines of the furniture gray and soft in the night vision, the faint line of light under the door from the hallway nightlight I kept on out of habit. Completely ordinary, except the door was opening, slowly, the way a door opens when someone is trying not to make a sound, a careful, deliberate inch at a time, the hallway light spilling in as a widening wedge across the floor, until the gap was wide enough for a person to see through, to see me, to stand in the frame and look. The clip ended there. 9 seconds total. When I checked the app history, no other motion had been detected for the rest of the night. Not the door closing again, not footsteps, nothing. Just that 9-second clip and then silence until my alarm. I stood in my kitchen with my coffee going cold and watched it 4 more times. Then I checked the front door. Deadbolt engaged, chain on. The windows in the living room, both latched. The bathroom window too small for a person, latched anyway. The back door off the kitchen, locked, the handle solid and unyielding when I tested it. No signs of anything, no signs of anyone. I went back and watched the clip one more time. That slow, careful widening of the door, the quality of deliberateness in it, the specific patience of someone who was not in a hurry, who was not startled, who had done this before, and knew exactly how far to push before the old hinge began to creak. Outside, the first gray light of morning was coming through the windows. The apartment was completely quiet around me. I thought about every night for the past 5 months, that I had woken up exhausted and blamed myself. Then I thought about all the nights the camera hadn't been there. I told myself it was the building. The Greer Street apartment was old, converted Victorian, which is a charming way of saying that the bones of it were over 100 years old and behaved accordingly. The floors had opinions. The radiator in the hallway knocked and hissed on cold nights like something inside it was trying to get out. Doors in old buildings shift in their frames as the temperature changes, as the foundation settles, as the wood expands and contracts through seasons it has already lived through dozens of times. A door that doesn't latch cleanly can drift. Everyone who has ever lived in an old building knows this. So I checked the latch, found nothing obviously wrong with it, the mechanism seated properly, the strike plate aligned, no visible warping in the frame. But I told myself it was still the building. Told myself the clip was a curiosity, not a threat. I bought a small rubber door wedge from the hardware store on my lunch break and jammed it under the bedroom door that night before I went to sleep. I woke up at 7:14 the next morning, same as always. Reached for my phone. The app had logged a clip at 3:17 a.m. The wedge was gone, pushed aside, sitting against the baseboard 3 feet from the door, which was open the same careful inch as the night before. I stared at the footage for a long time, at the gray night vision geometry of my own bedroom, at the dark gap where the door had been moved. Then I got up and checked every lock in the apartment again. Front door, back door, windows. All of them exactly as I'd left them, engaged and solid. I want to tell you that I called the police that morning. I want to tell you I did the sensible thing immediately. But the honest answer is that I stood in my kitchen trying to construct a version of events that didn't require me to believe what the footage was showing me. Because believing it had implications I wasn't ready to sit with before I'd had my coffee. I told myself the wedge must have shifted on the hardwood floor. I told myself the door drifted on its own and the wedge, not properly placed, had simply slid. I told myself that 3:17 was probably just when the temperature in the building dropped enough to make old wood move. I went to work, came home, replaced the wedge with a proper door stopper, the kind with a hinge you can pin closed. I checked the windows one more time, made dinner, ate it standing at the counter, and went to bed at 10. The app logged a clip at 3:17 a.m. The door stopper had been flipped up, not forced, just lifted, the way you would if you knew how it worked, and the door was open the same deliberate inch. That was night 3. After that, I stopped trying to explain it away with building mechanics. I told Owen the next evening, standing in the parking lot in the cold, my phone out so I could show him the clips side by side. He watched all 3 in silence, scrolling between them, his expression doing something careful that I recognized as a person deciding how alarmed to appear. When he handed the phone back, he said he thought I should call the building manager, that there might be a key issue. Old Victorians like this one sometimes had skeleton key locks that a determined person could open from outside. He said it matter-of-factly, reasonably, the way you say things when you're trying to be helpful and also trying not to frighten someone. But it was the side-by-side that was staying with me. 3 clips, 3 nights. 3 times the door opened to exactly the same width and held there for almost exactly the same duration before the motion detection window closed out. Not the random drift of settling wood, not an opportunistic latch failure. Something, someone, doing the same thing the same way at the same time 3 nights running with a precision that was either coincidental or was the opposite of coincidental. I started going back through the motion history further than I had before. Past the 3 nights since the camera arrived, back to the installation clip, back to the first rolling over in sleep footage from night 1. The app only stored 30 days of cloud history before it began overriding. Nothing to find before the camera arrived, of course, but I went through every clip anyway, methodical and slow, the radiator knocking softly in the hallway while I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone. On the 4th night's footage, I found something I'd missed on first watch. The clip was the standard 9 seconds, door opening, holding, darkness in the gap, but I'd been watching the door. That first morning I'd only watched the door, the widening wedge of hallway light, the deliberate inch-by-inch movement of it. This time I watched the gap itself, the darkness visible through it, the dark strip of hallway beyond. There was a shape in it, not clear, not definitive. The night vision camera was designed for pets, not forensics, and the resolution through a gap that narrow in that quality of dark was never going to give me anything clean. But there was a density to the shadow in the gap that was different from the wall beyond it, a geometry that wasn't the flat plane of the hallway, something with dimension, something that filled the space of the opening the way a person fills a doorway when they are standing very close to it and very still. Something looking in. I put the phone face down on the mattress. Outside, the first sleet of the season was beginning to tick against the bedroom window, thin and irregular, and the radiator in the hallway knocked once and went quiet. The apartment felt different around me than it had 20 minutes ago. The same rooms, the same furniture, the same floor plan I'd memorized over 5 months of living in it, all of it identical. Except now I was thinking about the shape in the gap. And I was thinking about how, every single night for the past week, that gap had been there, and I had been asleep on the other side of it, and something had been watching me from it. And then I started thinking about the 5 months before the camera, the exhaustion. The mornings I'd woken up feeling scraped hollow, blaming my diet or my stress or my circadian rhythm or the inexplicable failings of my own unremarkable blood work. 5 months of 3:17 a.m., 5 months of a door opening to exactly that width and holding there, and whatever was in the gap standing in it, watching while I slept. The sleet ticked against the window. I did not sleep that night at all. By morning, I had ordered a second camera. I'd spent the sleepless hours doing what people do when fear and exhaustion have burned away the ability to think clearly and left only a narrow, focused kind of productivity in its place. I'd gone through every clip again. I'd Googled skeleton key vulnerabilities in Victorian-era door hardware until the search terms started repeating themselves. I'd looked up locksmiths, building codes, tenant rights, the process for requesting a lock replacement from a landlord. I'd written a message to the building manager and deleted it 3 times because I couldn't figure out how to describe what I was asking for without sounding like something was wrong with me. At 4 a.m., I went and stood in the hallway and looked at my bedroom door from the outside. I want to tell you what that felt like, standing in the spot where the shape in the gap had been standing. The hallway was narrow, maybe 4 feet across, and the door, when open to that precise inch, would have framed the bed perfectly. Direct sightline, clear and unobstructed, the way a photographer frames a shot. Whoever had been standing here had chosen that exact width with some purpose in mind, and the purpose was visibility, not entry, not movement through the apartment, just standing there in the dark, looking through a gap they'd made in a closed door, watching a person sleep. The radiator knocked. I went back to bed and lay on top of the covers with the light on. The second camera arrived the following afternoon, smaller than the first, a little disc of a thing, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. I mounted it above the hallway light fitting, angled to cover the full length of the hall, both my bedroom door and the front door visible in the same frame. That night I checked the motion sensitivity settings on both cameras, set them as fine as the apps would allow, and went to bed with the lights off for the first time in 2 nights. I slept. Not well. Shallow. Restless. The kind of sleep that runs just below the surface of consciousness so that every sound reaches you distorted but present. But I slept. At some point I stopped hearing the sleet against the window. At some point the ceiling stopped being something I was staring at. 3:17 a.m. Both cameras triggered simultaneously. I didn't see the footage until morning. I made myself wait. Made myself lie in bed after my alarm went off and breathe for 5 full minutes before I picked up my phone, because some part of me understood that what was on it might change the shape of things in a way that couldn't be changed back. I'd been afraid before. Since the first clip, since the shape in the gap, I'd been living in a low, steady current of fear that I'd gotten somewhat used to the way you get used to a bad smell in a room after long enough. What I was about to feel, I suspected, was going to be different. I opened the hallway camera first. The corridor was empty. That was the first thing. The full length of the hallway, both doors visible, and nothing in it. No shape, no figure, no one standing at my bedroom door. Just the flat geometry of the walls and the faint glow of the nightlight at the baseboard and the closed, undisturbed surface of my bedroom door, which meant the motion trigger hadn't come from the hallway. I switched to the bedroom camera. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. The room looked ordinary. The familiar gray tones of the night vision, the bed, the furniture. The door was closed, not open an inch, not drifting, not disturbed in any way. Closed completely. Then I found the motion in the frame. It was me. I was sitting up in bed, eyes open, staring directly into the camera. I watched myself sit there, spine straight, hands in my lap, completely still, for 7 seconds. Then I lay back down with the mechanical smoothness of someone following an instruction, pulled the blanket up, and was still. The motion detection window stayed open for 3 more seconds, then closed. The next clip was my alarm going off at 7:14. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand and felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not fear exactly, though it was that too. Something closer to the sensation of finding out that the threat you'd been searching for outside the house had been inside it the whole time, had been you the whole time, and you still don't know what that means or how far it goes. I had no memory of sitting up. None at all. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, went to Owen's door at 8 a.m. and showed him both clips without saying anything. He watched the bedroom footage twice. The second time through, when my sitting-up figure appeared on screen and turned its face toward the camera, he made a sound under his breath, low and involuntary, the kind people make when something bypasses their composure entirely. "That's not sleepwalking," he said. "I know. Your eyes are open. You're looking at the camera. I know." He handed my phone back carefully, like it had become something that required care. He said maybe it was a parasomnia, a sleep disorder, something neurological, something that would explain the sitting up and possibly even the door if I'd been opening it while unconscious and had no memory of it. He said it with the particular energy of someone who urgently needs an alternative explanation to be true. I'd already thought of it, had turned it over thoroughly in the dark hours of the previous night. And there were pieces that fit. Sleepwalkers do open doors, do move through spaces with their eyes wide and blank, do return to bed without remembering. It was possible. Neurologically, medically, it was a possible explanation for a 32-year-old man who'd been waking up exhausted for 5 months and had recently been cleared of every other diagnosable cause. But sleepwalkers don't wedge themselves into a doorframe for 9 seconds at a time and look through a gap they've made at a specific width. They don't do it at exactly 3:17 a.m. They don't do it every single night. And they don't fold the door stopper back down when they're done. I went back to my apartment, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the hallway camera footage one more time. The empty corridor, the undisturbed door, the nightlight burning at the baseboard. No shape in the frame, no figure, nothing that shouldn't be there. The cold had gotten into the apartment overnight, the old windows doing their inadequate work against November. Outside, the sleet had stopped and left the street wet and gray and perfectly still. I was looking at the hallway footage because something was bothering me. Something about the negative space of it, the fact of the camera finding nothing, while the bedroom camera found me awake and staring, both triggered at the same timestamp, both cameras, 3:17 a.m. exactly. I paused the hallway clip at the 3-second mark and made myself look at it carefully. The full length of the hall, both doors, the nightlight, the front door. I made myself look at the front door. The chain was off. Let me tell you exactly what I knew at that moment. I knew I had engaged the chain the night before because I engaged it every single night without exception. The same sequence, the same order, deadbolt, then chain. Then a pull on the handle to confirm, the way you develop a habit so deep it stops feeling like a choice and becomes just the way you end a day. I knew the chain was engaged when I went to bed because my hands had done it the way they always did, and nothing about that night had been different. And I knew that in the hallway footage, paused at the 3-second mark, the chain was hanging loose against the door frame. Which meant that between the time I fell asleep and 3:17 a.m., someone had used a key to open the deadbolt from outside, slipped the chain off its track, entered the apartment, and stood at my bedroom door. And at the exact moment they were standing there, I had sat up in bed with my eyes open and stared into a camera that hadn't been there the night before. I called the police before I called Owen this time. The officer who came was younger than I expected, mid-20s, thorough, took notes without making me feel like I was wasting his time. He went through the apartment carefully, checked the doors and windows, examined the lock hardware on the front door. He asked me how many people had keys. I told him, me and the building manager and the previous tenant, theoretically if nobody had ever changed the lock, which was a question I'd never thought to ask in the spring when I moved in, and which was now sitting in my chest like something swallowed wrong. He asked to see the footage, watched all of it. The bedroom door clips first, then the hallway camera, then the sitting up clip with the expression of someone making a deliberate effort to stay neutral. When it finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You have no memory of sitting up," he said. "None. And no history of sleepwalking." "Not that I know of. I lived with people for most of my 20s. Nobody ever mentioned it." He looked at the paused frame of the chain again, loose against the door. Then he looked at me. "I want to get a detective involved," he said, which was the first sentence of that entire interaction that made my legs feel unreliable. They found evidence of the lock being worked, microscopic scoring on the deadbolt cylinder consistent with a bump key or a pick, the kind of marks that accumulate over repeated use and are invisible to the naked eye but apparent under the right light and the right tools. Not definitive proof of entry on any specific night, the detective told me, but consistent with a lock that had been opened from outside multiple times, consistent with exactly what the footage suggested. The building manager confirmed the lock had not been changed between tenants. He said this with the particular sheepishness of a man who understood, too late, the significance of that fact. A locksmith was there within the hour. New deadbolt, new hardware, changed on the spot while I stood in the hallway and watched. It should have helped. It did help, in the immediate practical sense. The door was different now. The cylinder was different. Whatever key had worked before would not work again. I stood in the newly locked apartment that afternoon and understood intellectually that the specific vulnerability had been closed. But I couldn't stop thinking about the sitting up. The thing Owen had said, "Your eyes are open, you're looking at the camera," had lodged somewhere I couldn't reach and wouldn't leave. Because a sleepwalker opens their eyes and sees nothing, navigates by something other than sight, doesn't direct their gaze with any apparent purpose. What the camera had captured was different. What the camera had captured was me, apparently unconscious, turning my face toward a lens I hadn't known was watching me and holding it there for 7 seconds, with an expression I couldn't fully read in the night vision gray, but which did not look blank. It looked like something between recognition and distress. The detective's working theory, shared with me carefully, framed as preliminary, was that someone had been entering the apartment to observe me. He used that word, observe. He said it was possible that the disruption of entry, the sound or movement of someone coming in, was registering in my sleeping brain as a threat stimulus and partially waking me. Not enough for conscious memory, but enough to produce a measurable physical response, sitting up, eyes open, the body's alarm system firing below the threshold of wakefulness. 5 months of it. 5 months of a sleeping brain registering something wrong and trying to surface and failing to break through, and waking up every morning wondering why the rest hadn't worked, blaming hydration and cortisol and the inadequacy of a pamphlet about sleep hygiene. He'd been watching me sleep since May. That was what the math said. I moved in on the 14th of May, and the exhaustion had started within the first few weeks. I slept at Owen's that night. He'd offered immediately, wouldn't hear otherwise. His couch was too short for me by 6 inches, and it didn't matter at all. I lay there in the dark of his living room and listened to the building, his pipes, his radiator, his windows against the November wind. And I thought about how I had memorized the sounds of my own apartment over 5 months and called them comfortable and called them mine. How I had built a life inside that space, a routine, a set of evenings with their own particular texture. How the whole time there had been someone else's rhythm running underneath it. At 3:17 a.m. I was still awake. I know because I was watching the time, because some part of me needed to be conscious at that specific moment, to be present in it in a way that 5 months of sleeping through it had not allowed. I lay on Owen's too short couch, and I watched the minutes count up to 3:17, and I held them there. This is what it was, every night. This is the minute. And then I watched them count past. Nothing happened. That was the terrible and clarifying thing. Nothing happened at 3:17 because I wasn't there. Because the door that had been opening at that time every night for 5 months was 4 floors and a locked lobby away. Nothing happened, and the number still meant something, still had weight, still felt like a specific kind of dark that the other minutes didn't. It still does. I think it always will. I went back to the apartment twice. The first time was 2 days after the lock change, with the detective and Owen and a level of ambient dread I was managing about as well as you'd expect. The goal was practical. Clothes, documents, the work laptop, the things a person can't go indefinitely without. I'd made a list at Owen's kitchen table that morning, written it out by hand because the act of writing felt grounding, gave me something concrete to do with the fear. 12 items. I moved through the apartment retrieving them in under 20 minutes without once sitting down or opening a drawer I didn't have to open. The cameras I took down last. Both of them. I held the bedroom one in my hand for a moment before putting it in the bag. This small plastic disc that had shown me something I couldn't unknow, that had answered a question I hadn't known I was living inside for 5 months. I felt something toward it I still can't fully name. Not gratitude exactly, though it was partly that. Something more complicated. The way you might feel about a diagnosis that explains months of suffering, relieved it has a name, devastated that the name exists. The second visit was 3 weeks later to collect the rest. By then, the investigation had a person of interest. He was a former tenant, not the one immediately before me. 2 tenants back, a man who had lived in the apartment for nearly 3 years before relocating for work. The building manager had confirmed his tenancy, confirmed the lock had never been changed in the intervening period, confirmed there was no record of a key return at move-out. The detective relayed all of this to me with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they know will land badly. And it did land badly, because what it meant was that the man had kept a key to an apartment he no longer lived in and had been using it, and that the only reason he'd been able to do so undetected for as long as he had was that nobody had thought to change the lock between him and me. 2 tenants, however long the one immediately before me had lived there, unknowing or not, then me. I've done the math on his tenancy and what the timing suggests, and I've decided not to think too hard about it. Some numbers don't benefit from examination. The detective told me charges were being pursued, told me the case was strong, the footage, the lock evidence, the key provenance, the building records establishing prior tenancy, told me I would likely be contacted about providing a statement for the prosecution. That call came 4 months later, and I gave the statement in a conference room with a prosecutor who was precise and thorough and treated the footage with exactly the gravity it deserved. I don't know the outcome. The case was still moving through the system the last time I received any communication about it, and at some point I made the deliberate decision to stop checking because checking had started to cost me more than not knowing. There are things I still haven't fully resolved. The sitting up is one of them. The detective's theory, partial arousal, a sleeping brain registering threat stimulus, was presented as the likely explanation, and I have no better one to offer. Sleep specialists, when I finally saw one 3 months after moving out, confirmed that what I'd experienced was consistent with a documented phenomenon, a form of parasomnia in which external disturbance produces a waking adjacent state, eyes open, body semi-upright, no conscious memory retained. They showed me literature. They were kind about it. They said the chronic exhaustion was consistent with 5 months of disrupted sleep architecture, with a brain that had been trying to wake itself up every night at 3:17 and expending enormous energy in the attempt. I understood all of it. I believed all of it. And I still sometimes lie awake in the apartment I moved into the following February. Different building, 3rd floor, a lobby with a key fob and a doorman who knows my face. And think about those 7 seconds of footage, about the way my own face looked in the gray-green night vision, turned toward a camera I hadn't consciously known was there. Because here's the thing that the sleep medicine literature doesn't fully account for, the thing I've turned over quietly in the year since and never quite set down. The camera had been there for one night. I'd mounted it the previous afternoon, I hadn't told anyone it was there. Not Owen, not the building manager, nobody. I'd set it up on the bookshelf and gone to sleep, and that was all. And at 3:17 a.m., in a state the specialists tell me produced no conscious memory and no wakeful awareness, my body had turned its face toward it directly, not toward the door, not toward the window, not in the unfocused way of someone whose eyes are open but registering nothing, toward the camera, at the camera. 7 seconds of something that looked, in the footage, less like a threat response and more like a message, though I recognize how that sounds. Recognize it belongs to a category of thinking I should probably be more disciplined about. I've mostly been more disciplined about it. I sleep on the 3rd floor now. The lobby requires a fob. The doorman's name is Gerald, and he waves when I come in, and I wave back, and the smallness of that exchange, the sheer, ordinary, unremarkable human smallness of it, means something to me that I wouldn't have been able to articulate 18 months ago, and can articulate clearly now. I check my locks the same way I always did. Deadbolt, handle, the sequence my hands learned years ago and never forgot. The difference is that now there's a chain too, a sliding chain I had installed myself the week I moved in, the kind that cannot be slipped from outside regardless of what key someone has. I check it last. I check it twice. Every night, without exception, the chain is on. Some habits are about comfort. Some are about something that lives deeper than comfort, something closer to the bone, the specific animal knowledge of a person who learned the hard way that the sounds a place makes when it belongs to you and the sounds it makes when it doesn't can be identical, can be perfectly, completely, terrifyingly identical. I know that now. I won't forget it. 3:17 a.m. I still notice it when I happen to be awake at that hour. The way a scar pulls sometimes, not painful exactly, just a reminder of what was there. I lie in the dark of the 3rd floor apartment and I listen to the building doing its ordinary work around me, and I wait for the minute to pass. It always does. It just never fully takes the weight of itself with it. The cable technician asked why there was a camera wired into my bedroom vent. I didn't put it there. He said it the way you'd ask about a light switch. Casual, almost bored. The way someone talks when they've been crawling through attic spaces and squinting at junction boxes all day, and their capacity for surprise ran out somewhere around the 3rd house. He came out of my bedroom with his tablet under one arm and a coil of cable over his shoulder, and he said, "Hey, so, quick question. That camera in the vent above your bed, is that yours or is that something the previous tenant left?" I was standing in the kitchen. I had a mug of coffee in my hand that I'd reheated twice already and kept forgetting to drink. "What camera?" I said. He looked at me for a second, recalibrated something behind his eyes. "In the bedroom vent," he said again, slower. "The ceiling vent, above the bed. There's a small camera mounted inside it, wired in. I noticed it when I was running the cable along the baseboard. The wire roots up through the wall, which is why it caught my eye. I figured it was probably a security thing you set up, but I wanted to check before I didn't put a camera in my house," I said. The coffee mug was still in my hand. I became very aware of it, of my hand, of the fact that I was standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon having a conversation I did not have the framework to process. His name was Trevor. It said so on his shirt, embroidered in yellow thread above the company logo. Trevor was maybe 35, unremarkable in the way of a person you'd pass in a grocery store without registering. But the look that crossed his face in that moment, that slow reconfiguration, the professional calm giving way to something more human and uncomfortable, is something I've never forgotten. Because it wasn't suspicion. It was recognition. Like he'd seen this before or heard of it, and had hoped he never would personally. "Okay," he said carefully. "Then you're going to want to call the police. My name is Danny. I was 27 when this happened, living alone in a rental house in a mid-sized city where I'd moved 8 months earlier for a job in pharmaceutical logistics. which sounds more interesting than it is. I'd taken the position because the salary was better than anything I could find at home, and because I was 26 and felt like I was supposed to be doing something bold and relocating to a city where I knew exactly 2 people felt close enough to bold without being reckless. The house I rented was older, 1940s construction, the kind with thick plaster walls and creaky hardwood and windows that swelled in humidity and stuck in their frames. It had a clawfoot tub and a back porch that caught the afternoon light in a way that felt almost staged, like a photograph of a house more than the house itself. My landlord, a man named Mr. Farrow, who lived about a 20-minute drive away and communicated primarily through terse text messages, had told me during the showing that the previous tenant had been there for 9 years. Practically part of the place, he'd said, with a fondness I remember finding a little odd. I didn't think about that sentence again until after Trevor found the camera. 8 months I'd lived there. 8 months of learning which floorboards to avoid at night, which burner on the stove ran hot, how long to let the shower run before the water came through warm. 8 months of making a home out of someone else's walls, hanging prints, buying a rug for the bedroom that covered most of the old stain near the closet, rearranging the furniture 3 times until it finally felt right. The bedroom I'd landed on had the bed pushed to the center of the far wall, underneath the ceiling vent, because that's where it fit best, and because I liked being able to see the window from where I slept, underneath the ceiling vent. I'd never once looked up at it with any particular attention. It was a vent, standard issue, painted over metal slats the same off-white as the ceiling. The kind of thing your eye slides past 10,000 times without registering. I had looked at it, I realized, in the abstract and unfocused way you look at every part of a space you think you own, seeing it but not seeing it. Never once as a thing that might be looking back. Trevor waited while I put the mug down on the counter. He had the decency not to say anything else, not to fill the silence with reassurances that would have felt hollow. I walked past him to the bedroom doorway and stopped there, one hand on the frame. The vent was in the ceiling above the center of the bed, exactly where I'd always known it was and never thought about. The slats were angled, the standard downward pitch designed to direct airflow. In the gap between the second and third slat, barely visible, was the dark, circular lens of something small that had been there the whole time. "How long do you think?" I started. "I can't tell you that," Trevor said from behind me, quietly. "That's for the police." Outside, it had started to rain. That low, gray kind of afternoon rain that shows up without announcement and settles in like it has nowhere else to be. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and looked at the vent above my bed and tried to remember every single thing I had ever done in that room. I couldn't stop doing that for a very long time. The 2 officers who responded were polite and unhurried in a way I found maddening. Not because they were dismissive. They weren't, exactly. They listened, they took notes. They asked Trevor to walk them through what he'd found and where. But there was a procedural steadiness to the whole thing. This is a thing that happens quality to how they moved through my house. It made me feel like I was the only person in the room for whom this was extraordinary. One of them photographed the vent from the doorway. The other one asked if I had a ladder. I did not have a ladder. Trevor had one in his truck. They retrieved the camera with gloved hands and sealed it in a clear evidence bag and set it on my kitchen table. And I stood there and looked at it. Small, maybe the size of a thumb drive, matte black casing with a tiny lens at one end and a short wire tail at the other. Slight curve to the housing, designed to sit flush against the interior angle of a vent. Designed, I kept thinking. Designed to be there. Someone had looked at a product listing and read the dimensions and thought, yes, that one. That's the right size. "Do you recognize this?" one of the officers asked me. "No." "And you've been living here how long?" 8 months. Since February. He wrote something down. "And the property owner is?" "Mr. Farrow. I have his number." I pulled out my phone and read it off, and watched him write it down, too. And something about watching the pen move across the notepad, the slow, ordinary fact of it, made my legs feel suddenly unreliable. I sat down at the kitchen table without deciding to. Sat down about a foot away from the bag with the camera in it, and stared at the rain coming down outside the window. 8 months. February through October. 240-something days. One of them was on the phone with Mr. Farrow within the hour. I sat in the living room and listened to the half of the conversation I could hear, which was mostly a lot of, and I understand, and we'll need you to come down. Apparently, Mr. Farrow was surprised. Apparently, Mr. Farrow was cooperative. Apparently, Mr. Farrow had no idea how a camera had come to be wired into the ceiling vent of a bedroom in a property he owned, which was either the truth or the most important thing he'd ever said in his life. Trevor left after giving his statement. He paused at the front door and looked back at me with an expression that was trying to be reassuring and falling short, and he said, "I'm sorry I had to be the one." Which was a strange thing to say, and also exactly the right thing to say. I thanked him. I meant it. After the officers left, I called my friend Priya, the closest of the two people I knew in the city, and she was at my door in 20 minutes with a bottle of wine she didn't open and an overnight bag she'd packed for herself without being asked. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and let me talk. And when I ran out of things to say, she didn't try to fill it. That's the kind of person Priya was. She understood that some silences weren't asking to be fixed. What I kept coming back to was the wiring. That was the detail I couldn't metabolize. Because a hidden camera you could almost construct a mundane explanation for. A previous tenant with paranoid tendencies. Someone's misguided attempt at a security setup. Technology left behind the way people leave furniture without thinking too hard about it. Stranger things had been found in old rentals. I'd read enough Reddit threads in those first stunned hours to know that. But wired in. Trevor had said it twice. He'd noticed it because of the wire, because it routed up through the wall in a way that had caught his professional eye. This wasn't a battery-operated camera someone had wedged into a vent on a whim. Someone had run a wire through the wall, which meant they had opened the wall, or accessed it through the attic space, or had enough knowledge of the house's construction to route a cable without it being visible from inside the room. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't an oversight. That was a project. I thought about Mr. Farrow describing the previous tenant. 9 years, practically part of the place. I thought about myself for 8 months, moving through that bedroom without a second thought, getting dressed, sleeping. Every unremarkable private thing a person does in the room they think of as theirs. I thought about the window, which I'd sometimes left uncovered because it faced the backyard, and the backyard was fenced, and I'd felt fine about that. I thought about the nights I'd come home tired and not bothered with the lamp, just used my phone screen for light. All the times I had been in that room, the way you are in a room when you believe you are alone. The rain had settled into a steady, low hiss outside, barely audible through the old plaster walls. Priya reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and I looked down at it like I was seeing it from a very long distance. "You should call your landlord yourself," she said quietly. "Don't let the police be the only ones talking to him." She was right. I knew she was right. But I also knew that the moment I made that call, this stopped being something that was happening to me and became something I had to actively navigate. Some part of me wasn't ready for that yet. I looked at the ceiling above the kitchen table. Standard vent, same off-white paint, same angled slats. I didn't look away for a long time. Mr. Farrow came to the house the following morning. He was older than I'd pictured from his texts. Mid-60s, soft around the middle, wearing a fleece vest over a collared shirt like a man who'd retired from something practical. He stood in my living room with his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving around the space with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between discomfort and recognition, like a man returning to a place he had complicated feelings about. He said he was shocked. He said it twice. I'm shocked. I really am shocked. In the way people repeat things when they're trying to land them. I asked him about the previous tenant. He hesitated. Not long, a beat, maybe two, but I was watching for it, and I caught it. Then he said the man's name was Robert Vess, lived in the house from 2012 to 2021. Quiet, reliable, paid on time every month without fail, kept the place in good condition. When he'd finally given notice, Mr. Farrow had actually tried to talk him out of leaving. Why did he leave? I asked. Another hesitation. He didn't say exactly, just that it was time. I didn't push. I asked if he had a forwarding address. He said the police had already asked the same thing. He'd given them what he had, a P.O. box that, as it turned out, had been closed the same month Robert Vess vacated the house. A man who lived 9 years in one place and left without a forwarding address. I thought about that the whole afternoon after Mr. Farrow left, while Priya drove me to get the things I needed from the bedroom. I hadn't slept there the night before and didn't intend to, but I needed clothes, my laptop, my medication from the nightstand drawer. I stood in the bedroom doorway and pointed, and Priya retrieved things without comment, both of us very carefully not looking at the ceiling. The detective assigned to the case called me 3 days later. Her name was Reyes, businesslike, not warm but not cold either, the kind of professional voice that gives you information without editorializing. She told me the camera had been traced to a model discontinued in 2019, sold through a handful of now defunct online retailers, common enough that the purchase history was a dead end. The wire routing suggested someone with working knowledge of the house's internal structure, the attic access, the duct layout. Someone who had lived there long enough to know exactly where to go and how to do it quietly. Then she told me they'd found a second one. I was standing in Priya's kitchen when she said it. I sat down on the floor, not in a chair, on the floor, back against the cabinet, because that was simply as far as I got. The second camera was in the bathroom vent. Same model, same wiring method, same careful installation. Pointed at the shower. Detective Reyes gave me a moment before she continued. They had gone through the house more thoroughly after finding the first. Pulled vent covers, checked crawl spaces, ran the attic. 2 cameras total, both in the same style, both installed with the same technique. Both positioned, she said carefully, to maximize coverage of the most private spaces in the home. I asked when they thought the cameras had been installed. She said they couldn't date it precisely. The hardware suggested sometime between 2017 and 2019, based on the model's production window. Robert Vess had been in the house during that entire period. So had any tenants between him and me? I asked. A pause. No, she said. You moved in 6 weeks after he vacated. The house sat empty for 6 weeks, and did the math sitting there on Priya's kitchen floor. 2019 to 2021. 2 years minimum that those cameras had been running while Robert Vess was still in the house, watching his own rental. Which raised a question I hadn't let myself fully form until that moment. The kind of question that once it surfaces, you can't push back on. Why does a man install cameras in his own bathroom and bedroom? There were answers that were almost innocent. Paranoia, a feeling of being watched himself, some kind of compulsive documentation. I tried to hold on to those, but none of them held up against the directionality. Both cameras had been positioned with a specific angle, a specific field of view, not covering the room, covering the places where a person would stand unclothed. Someone had built that into my house, and then left it there. Left it there and vacated quietly, no forwarding address, right as the house was going back on the rental market. The rain started up again that evening. I'd barely noticed it stopping. Priya brought me tea I didn't drink, and sat with me while I stared at the middle distance and tried to construct a version of this story where Robert Vess had left those cameras behind by accident, or out of some reason I could understand, or without thinking about who might move in next. I couldn't build it. No matter how I arranged the pieces, I kept arriving at the same conclusion. He had known exactly what he was leaving behind, and whoever rented the house after him would have no reason to look up. "I need to know if there are more," I said finally. Not to Priya, really, just out loud, to the room. She put her hand on my arm. "Reyes said they checked everything." I know what she said. I pulled up the detective's number on my phone. It was almost 9 o'clock. I called anyway. It rang 4 times before she picked up. I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, whether they had checked inside the walls. The pause that followed was not as short as I needed it to be. They sent a crew to the house 4 days later. Not just Detective Reyes and a patrol officer. An actual crew. 2 technicians from a private firm the department contracted for electronic sweep work. The kind of people who did this professionally and owned equipment I didn't have names for. Priya drove me over because I couldn't bring myself to go alone, and we sat in her car across the street and watched them carry things inside in hard-sided cases while a light rain moved through in slow, gray sheets. I hadn't been back since the afternoon had sent Priya in to collect my things. 8 months of building a life inside those walls, and I was now watching strangers walk through the front door like it was a crime scene, which I suppose it was. Reyes came out to the car about 40 minutes in. She crouched beside the passenger window with her collar up against the rain and told me they'd found a 3rd camera. "Hallway vent," she said, positioned to cover the stretch of hall between the bedroom and the bathroom. I heard the words. I processed them individually, each one landing separately with a small, distinct weight. 3rd camera, hallway. I watched a raindrop track down the windshield and split at a crack in the glass and become 2 smaller drops going in different directions. "Is that all of them?" Priya asked, because I wasn't asking anything. Reyes said they were still working. She said it in a tone that meant she wasn't making promises. They found nothing else that day. No 4th camera, no additional wiring, nothing in the walls beyond the existing cable routes, which all checked out as original construction. 3 cameras total: bedroom, bathroom, hallway. A complete circuit. Every path between the private spaces of the house covered by at least 1 angle. Whoever had designed it hadn't done it carelessly. They'd thought about movement. They'd thought about the gaps. The sweep also turned up something else. Not a camera, a router. A small secondary wireless router tucked into the attic space above the bedroom, zip-tied to a rafter, with a SIM card rather than a hardwired connection. The technicians explained it to me in the kitchen with the patience of people accustomed to translating bad news into plain language. The cameras fed to this router. The router broadcast over cellular signal, which meant the footage didn't go to a hard drive in the house that someone had to physically retrieve. It went somewhere else, remotely, in real time or near enough. The word remotely sat in the room with us for a moment, like something with its own weight. "So someone could have been watching from anywhere," I said. "Theoretically," one of the technicians said. "The SIM was prepaid, registered to a name that doesn't match any ID in the system. The carrier is cooperating, but the account was dormant. Last active ping was about 11 months ago. 11 months ago. 1 month before I moved in." I thought about that sequencing. The cameras had been live while Robert Vess was in the house. The router had gone dormant approximately 1 month before my move-in, around the same time he'd vacated. Which meant one of 2 things. Either he'd disabled it when he left, in which case the cameras had been dark for my 8 months there, and this was terrible but finite, a horror with a clear boundary. Or something else had interrupted the signal. A technical failure, a dead SIM, a lapse in whatever account maintained it. And the dormancy was incidental rather than intentional. I asked the technicians which they thought was more likely. They exchanged a glance that lasted about a half-second too long. "Honestly?" the senior one said. "Prepaid SIMs lapse if you don't reload them. Could have just run out of credit and nobody topped it up." He paused. "We can't tell you the cameras weren't active after that. The hardware was intact and functional. If the signal had been restored at any point, they would have worked." Reyes walked me outside after that. We stood on the front porch under the narrow overhang while the rain came down off the eave in a thin curtain between us and the street. And she told me what she could about the Robert Vess investigation. They'd located him. I felt my whole body tighten when she said that. At an address 2 states away. He'd been interviewed. He denied installing the cameras. He denied any knowledge of them. He had, she said, been cooperative and calm in a way that told her exactly nothing about whether he was telling the truth. No charges yet. Insufficient evidence to establish who had installed the equipment or when. No footage recovered from any device. No direct link between Vess and the specific hardware beyond the circumstantial weight of 9 years and a sealed P.O. box and a very convenient lack of forwarding address. "What does that mean going forward?" I asked. "It means the investigation is open," she said. "It means we're not done." What it meant practically, I understood without her saying it, was that I was standing in front of a house that was technically still mine. I was still on the lease. The landlord had made no move to release me from it. The whole legal machinery was grinding slowly through its processes, and I had no idea what to do with that. I looked at the front door. I thought about every morning I'd come out of that bedroom in the half-dark, moving on autopilot toward the bathroom. Every night I'd padded down that hallway in a t-shirt with my phone in my hand. Every private and ordinary and unguarded moment that had occurred in that house across 8 months while I thought I was alone. Something is different, I think, about being watched without knowing. It's not just violation. It's the retroactive theft of your own past. All those moments were already gone, already fixed, and I couldn't reach back and pull them out of the record, couldn't reclaim them. Whatever had or hadn't been seen, it had already happened. I told Reyes I'd be in touch. Then I walked back to Priya's car and got in, and pulled the door shut and sat there while the rain turned the windows gray and opaque, and the house behind us disappeared. I never went back inside. They checked inside the walls. Detective Reyes arranged it 2 days later. A more thorough sweep, she called it, which was police language for, "We should have done this the first time." A tech from the department came with equipment I didn't recognize, scanning tools and something that looked like a medical scope on a long, flexible cable. I wasn't there for it. Priya drove me to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, and we sat at a corner table for 4 hours, and she didn't once suggest we talk about something else. Reyes called at 2:17 p.m. "Nothing additional in the walls," she said. "No further devices in the attic space." The 2 cameras were, as far as they could determine, the full scope of what had been installed. She said it like it was good news, and I understood why. And I also sat with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been braced for worse and doesn't quite know how to come down from that. 2 cameras, bedroom and bathroom, both pointing where they pointed. Just those 2. I went back to the house that evening to collect more of my things. And I want to be honest about what that was like, because I think it matters. I'd been in the house dozens of times since Trevor made his discovery, grabbing belongings, meeting with officers, walking Detective Reyes through the layout. But those visits had all had purpose, had been structured around tasks that kept my attention focused outward. This time I walked in alone, stood in the entryway, and just existed in the space for a moment. Let it be the house. It was still the same house. The floorboard near the bathroom still creaked on the left side. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the cumin I'd cooked with last week. My plants were still on the sill, 2 of them starting to droop from the days of neglect. The rug I'd bought for the bedroom, the one that covered the old stain, the one I'd been so pleased with, was still visible through the open door at the end of the hall. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, and none of it was mine anymore. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Something had been taken out of the house that couldn't be put back. Not safety, exactly. I'd already established that nothing had been structurally altered. No one was hiding in closets. The locks hadn't been touched. Something quieter than safety. The assumption that a space is only yours when you decide to share it. That the privacy of a room is a real thing, and not just a feeling you have because no one has told you otherwise yet. I packed a box, moved methodically. Clothes, books, the small things from the nightstand, the good lamp from the corner. I did not look at the ceiling. I'd made that rule for myself, and I kept it. I was taping the box closed in the hallway when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer, some instinct I can't justify, the same kind that makes you pick up a ringing phone in the middle of the night, even when nothing good ever comes from it. Is this Danielle? A man's voice, older, something careful in the way he said my name, a deliberateness that made the back of my neck prickle. Who is this? My name is Carl Aiken. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. I got your number from... Well, that part's complicated. I used to live in the house you're renting, not immediately before you. I was there before Robert. The tape gun was still in my hand. I set it down very slowly on top of the box. Before Robert Vess, I said. That's right, 2009 to 2012. I left when my wife got transferred. A pause. I heard about what they found. I heard through... I know someone at the department. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to call because there's something I think you should know, and I wasn't sure the police would think to ask. I sat down on the hallway floor, back against the wall, the same position I'd been defaulting to for days now, all the doors visible. Some survival logic I'd developed without noticing. Tell me, I said. When I moved out, Carl said. Robert Vess came to look at the house before he signed the lease. Standard showing. Mr. Farrow walked him through. Except after Farrow left, Vess stayed. Said he'd let himself out. He just wanted to take some measurements. I thought nothing of it. You don't, do you? A man says he wants to measure the rooms. You think he's figuring out where his furniture goes. The rain had started again outside, quiet and persistent against the old plaster walls. He was in the house alone for about 40 minutes, Carl said. I've thought about that a lot since I heard what they found. 40 minutes is long enough to go into an attic, long enough to look at duct layouts, long enough to figure out what could be done and where. The implications of that settled over me like something cold. Robert Vess had surveyed this house before he ever signed a lease. He had stood in these rooms and looked at these ceilings and made calculations. He had moved in with a plan already formed, a project already designed in his head, waiting only for the keys to be in his hand. 9 years he had lived here. 2 years with cameras running that we knew of, and then he'd left, quietly, with no forwarding address and no explanation. Left everything exactly as it was, for the next tenant. I realized I hadn't said anything in almost a minute. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Carl was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before, a thread of something personal, something unresolved. Because when I lived there, he said slowly, I always felt like I was being watched, and I never knew why. And I'd like to know if that was real.